1 minute. Let's just sit here for a minute and see if it connects. If not, what we'll do is we'll just record it. And looks like trying to get started. Let's just give it 1 minute. Like I said, if this doesn't work, we can just always just record. There we are, and we're live. We are live. Sorry about the technical difficulties, folks, but we got it all squared out. We're here with Breeder Steve, the Slovenian Hobbit, and Not So Dog will be joining us shortly. Steve, I'm sorry to ask you to start your story for the third time, but start your story for the third time.
That's all right. I'll get it straight to you one of these days.
Great.
I started growing in my late teens back in north or southwestern Ontario,
I'm
and
sorry to cut you off. Before you tell us about starting growing, how about you tell us about your first experiences with cannabis, like smoking and just seeing it?
okay, you know what? I think the first time we really set about to get high was in a lady's friend's backyard, and she lived a few blocks away. She was maybe a year older, and me and a couple of my buddies had gone over there with a few beers to hang out and drink beers that night. And this is when we were like 15, I think. And she had a vial of green oil, and
I thought you
I
were going to say
hadn't had
something
before. A
else. I
couple
was
of
like,
my
holy
friends had.
shit.
What's that?
I said, I thought you were going to say something else. You said
No,
she had a vial. I thought you were going to say she had a vial of something psychedelic.
yeah, yeah. Well, this was back then. That was the most common form of cannabis in my area was oil, and usually green oil, sometimes a cherry oil, or a little brown or hash oil. But oil was the thing, and a lot of it was from Jamaica, but some of it was local that they would just use ISO or something to extract their shitty homegrown or whatever. Or their trim if they some good homegrown was happening around starting up, but not when I was 15. At least I never saw it. The first thing we saw was oil, then hash, then brickweed, and then Rockwool Northern Lights indoors, and then also Northern Lights field grown started showing up. So there, it was really phenomenal actually. So that it was like holy fucking three. The 1 year we were flipping some buds as youngsters, and there was the Northern Lights outdoor, and it was a friend's older brother had three buddies that were growers, and they would pay a soybean farmer 10 grand in the spring to go through his field with his tractor and wagon and everything, and they would take post hole diggers. The two guys would drill holes like every fourth soybean or something, and just dig the holes. And one guy would drive the tractor, and then the three guys would come back filling the holes with just a potting soil mix and slow release fertilizer. It wasn't high end grown, but it was, they were growing 700 pounds, the three guys, and this was when one plant would get you jail, right? And they were doing 700 pounds a season, just like clockwork, and it was really good. But then the last year of it, the one of the three dudes took off with the crop and supposedly went to BC, but the one guy ripped off the other two, and then it was over. But before that, we were able to. They would front it to us because we were known to them, and they would front us like 10 pounds or whatever. We'd go break it down into QPs for friends and get it out there. But it was awesome, and I remember one of the things I remember about that early batch of high quality outdoor was that we were going through and we were like, okay, well, let's keep the tops. And we'd separate the tops. And we're like, wait, it's way more tops. It's like almost 80% tops or something because they were just short 2 ounce plants, that they were growing. So they didn't have a lot of branches and stuff. So we were like, oh, we can't keep all the tops. That's like 80% of the weed, So it was just so many thick tops and people were very impressed. But we started taking the crown off them. It'd be like a little circle of calyxes at the top. We call it the tip top. Just nip, take, filled up little bags of like the tip tops, just calyx or bracts really. And that was pretty mean, but still, it was fun at the time. We were young punks. But that's what sort of inspired me. I was like, man, if these idiots can grow this, surely we can learn to do this ourselves. And we don't need to grow 700 pounds. All I really want is my personal, you know? So I was like, let me get a few pounds out there and figure it out. So that's fun. That's
Can you tell us about when that was?
well, that would have been really like the late 80s or the mid to late 80s. Probably like, I don't know.
I was getting Jamaican at that time too, and I was getting the Jamaican brickweed, as well as the honey oil and the green oil at the time.
Okay.
So it's interesting that in New York City we had that Jamaican stuff was making it around.
Sure, man. They're productive people. I was when I was in university in Ottawa later. I started there the end of the 80s, and the weed I would get was from Rastas in Montreal, and they had it in 500-gram cans that looked like an apple juice can or something. And it was a white can and it had a flag, a Jamaican flag, and a picture of saltwater toffees. And it said candies from Jamaica. Crack the can, get their roll, you know? And sometimes, and it was really quite good for lightly seeded brick. Like it was green and pliable. You could peel it off and stuff. They would always be like, steam it like the peas, man. Steam it into peas and pull it apart. And it'll, you get more. You know, and I never did. I would just saw the bloody thing into pucks. But they would occasionally have some non-brick, non-seeded, total sense lamb's breath. And that was really special. But it was like their head stash, and you couldn't get any quantity of it. If you were lucky, you were getting a kilo or two of the regular. They might sell you a quarter of that for yourself or something, you know. But it was really special. I knew some guys that got busted, and they were in the paper. They had a deal bringing the Jamaican oil into Toronto. And what they had was this is all, known now because they all got busted and it was a very long time ago. But they had Jamaican cleaning crews on both ends for the airlines. So that under the sinks, they packed it full of sealed bags of oil, literally oilless, smelled like Jamaican rum, smelled like weed and rum. But they got popped with it, unfortunately. They were doing really well. They were pretty young, and they were having a party on the yacht the one guy had bought out in Lake Huron. And some chick, there was all these rockers out there, with Black Sabbath cranked on this nice yacht, and there were lots of them on acid and drinking. And one, they got tangled in a fishing net or something, and that's how they got spotted. This is how they got spotted. They had some kind of boat trouble, like tangled in a net or tangled in something. And the one guy was jumping off to untangle it, and this one chick started freaking out, got on the radio, Mayday, 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 and then the Coast Guard comes out and check, like, okay, well, whose boat is this? Like, it's mine. And they're like, what? You serious? They didn't really, it's your dad's or what? Fine. And then they were like, okay, we got to see who this guy is, That's how they started looking at them. And then it all came out later in the news, but they had a thing going there for a while. We used to
Wow.
smoke. It was the grossest thing. We'd smoke bottle tokes. So you'd take a dime, put it in a beer bottle, and bang it on your heel to make a little hole in the bottom of the beer bottle. And then we'd put the oil or hash on the end of a cigarette and stick it in like a match head worth, put it on the heater so it starts smoking and stick it in the bottle. And then when the bottle fills up, it's so raunchy. Makes me feel bad just thinking about it right now.
We used to take the oil, like with like a butter knife, and spread it on papers,
Yeah,
and
we
like
did that too.
and
Yeah,
like with
yeah.
the honey oil, when you spread it on the paper would become translucent.
right?
So you would just have like a clear looking joint, and it would make a real mess. Like when you're smoking it, it would just be like dripping off the top end of it. Like it was it was crazy. This, it's funny. I'll tell a little story. Um, Back when BHO was really new, someone taught me how to make it, and I brought some to the clubs. And this was before dab rigs or anything like that. And what I used to do is I would take a crack pipe and I would, like the kind that has like a ball on the end, and I would drip it into the bottom. And then with a lighter, I would make it boil and smoke it like that. And so I took it to the clubs and they loved it. They had never seen anything like this before. And, they loved it. But this was, when it was pure medical, and they were like, well, we love this, but we can't recommend this to our patients because we can't tell them to go out and buy a crack pipe.
Optics
So
are good, but it's a beautiful way. Like you just have to
yeah,
start calling it an oil pipe. You know,
yeah, but everybody at
you,
the time, just a clear
you know,
thing, right?
or
And
a meth
so
pipe or something.
what I did was I smashed trim into it. Okay, and damn, I'm forgetting what's the name of the guy that did the oh, I can't remember his name. The guy who's in a wheelchair. Um, he used to have clubs in Berkeley and stuff. I can't believe I can't remember his name right now because I saw him at like some show and stuff. But anyway, I smashed all the leaf into the oil and I made what looked like a brick, like the Jamaican brickweed, but it was just leaf and oil. And now you can just like rip a chunk off of it, put it in a pipe, and smoke it. So I took it to the clubs and they loved it. They absolutely loved it.
It's
And
the first infused weed.
well, it was the first uh space rocks. What are those things called?
Mm,
Like where they're just
moon
like
rocks.
moon rocks. Exactly. It was the first moon rocks. Um, but it was just it was like 80% trim held together with 20% oil, and they just loved that stuff. Hey, Mr. Farmstrong, I'm sure you remember who I'm talking about. Farmstrong in the chat, Louis. Who was it that we took that picture with? You know who I'm talking about. Anyway, yeah. So they didn't want the pure stuff. They want the stuff that was just like contaminated with
It's
trim.
funny. The
Yeah,
other nice way to smoke it we always liked was hot rocks, where you use those charcoals that you get
yeah.
for the shisha. So you just get hot rocks burning in an ashtray or something, and then you just keep dropping oil on it, and you put a
A straw.
straw or a tube to suck it,
Yeah,
right? So yeah, those were popular. Yeah, there was a phase. That was kind of the pre. That was the cleanest way to hit the oil, I think, before because there's no lighter juice or anything, going in. If you're just hitting it off the hot rocks, I think that was the cleanest way to do it pre-dabs.
yeah. Those uh, those charcoals.
Yeah, charcoal.
Alrighty, well, continue with your story. Tell us about when you started growing.
Well, I started growing as a young lad, but I was doing it homegrown, basically outdoors or sometimes one light in the winter. Um, before I moved to Vancouver, and after a year in Vancouver, after a year of collecting stuff, I'd already started saving my own seeds for probably the last 3 years of the 5 years when I started growing. Because back then, even if you were just doing it as a hobby, there wasn't reliable source of seeds or clones, right? It was really hit or miss if you were just going to take a chance every spring what the hell you'd find because there really wasn't a lot out there. And you just got in the habit like, oh, it's important to learn to seed a little branch and save some seeds. So otherwise, you could lose something if you're not keeping a light that year or whatever. So I got growing it and keeping seeds as a hobby. After I moved to Van, I just went crazy wanting to collect and try every cutting in town or all the seeds I could get my hands on, and really did a lot of comparisons and selections. And I donated some seeds to Embry, who was busted selling seeds for the first time. So I said, "Hey, I just went down and said, if you're going to keep selling seeds, I want to donate you a jar." He only had like one or two brands I think he was carrying at the time. There was a Sensi and BC Seed Co. And the guy from BC Seed Co. was the guy that brought the Sensi stuff back. And then I think later he started bringing Dutch Passion as well, expanding the lines a bit. But there wasn't much selection. There was like, you know, first time I think I went to his shop, I think he had three types of seed. There was NL Hayes and NL Hayes Hawaiian. So anyway, I donated them some of the seeds I'd made myself in Ontario, which I'd called Medway Madness originally for the name of the creek by where I grew them and watered them from. But then out west, I was like, well, I gotta give it a better name. So I was smelling it and tasting it and thinking, it's sweet and sour. And it's got a fruitiness, but it's also, fairly sour. And I thought, I'll call it Jolly Ranchers because it reminded me of those tanginess of the Jolly Rancher candies. So that was the first seed I put out. And then I used the male of that to hit one of my favorite females that I'd found in Vancouver in the clone only department. It didn't have a real name. The guy just called it the only thing worth growing. So I was like, but he never finished it. Like it was always red hair, immature, but it was faintly sweet, but it was always like wasn't quite there. So I said, let me grow this shit right out and see what it looks like actually finished and swell, let it swell up and get swollen. And it was unmistakable. I would ask everybody that came over, I'm like, smell that one. What does it smell like? Everybody would, oh, it's sweet pink grapefruits. So we called, eventually I just said, everybody knows that smells like sweet pink grapefruit. It's unmistakable. So the first feed I made with it, I hit it with that sour Jolly Rancher and sold a sweet pink grapefruit. In the description, put the real ruby red. And then I think that showed up in a lot of things, some on the East Coast. Anyway, it was interesting to see. So that was really the sweet pink grapefruit is the clone only, but there was one small release of a couple thousand seeds of it crossed with Jolly Rancher as a Spice of first made in BC Spice of Life release. And then after that, there was Sweet Skunk, which was an NL Haze with the grapefruit. And then there was a really nice blueberry male that made the Sweet Tooth, Shishka Berry, Blue Domino, and Plum Bud, and that pollination. That blueberry male was one of the nicest I'd ever found for sure. The um, spacing out some of
Oh,
those
people,
out
people asked what I was smoking. I didn't
Of
want to interrupt
course.
you, but I got some, and I hope I don't pronounce it wrong again. Bujulero, long flowering strains from the Bujulero farm, and yeah, I haven't really smoked this stuff before. I just got it. This is like some of the pearls. This is the African haze times original haze, and I had told them that I had never smoked pearls,
Oh, that'll
and
be
they
fun.
they got me some of this stuff. They have a club now, like a club where you can buy from them and then have it sent to your local dispensary. So I recommend everybody check out Bujulero. But yeah, I'm excited because out here in California, very few people do these long flowering sativas. Oh, you wanted to see that, and I pulled it away. Very few people do these long flowering sativas, and I have to admit that back in the day, if I grew something like this, it would have just gotten tossed. Like I would never grow something that produced
It's
flowers like
nice.
this.
You know
You
what?
know,
I definitely don't look down my nose at anything by the shape of it or because I know that the aromas and flavors, once you roll it up, what does that taste like? That's more important to me than what it looks like. But we live in a very visual Instagram world
well,
and
to me, what it
people
smells
get
like and
looking for
tastes
a
like
look.
is the most important thing.
Yeah.
But I guess it was out of ignorance and also like as a cultivator, like, you know, when I was growing, when I first started growing, if I had something that was growing so sparse like that and taking so long, it just didn't seem like that was something that was a
Yeah.
good idea to grow. So, um, but now I'm excited that I get to smoke some long flowering sativas, and I'm excited because I became friends with the Bujilero crew, and
Looks good
yeah,
to me,
so
man. I'm down with those skinny girls for sure. I
yeah.
remember
I
the
like
first
all
time
girls.
I
I like skinny girls. I like fat girls. I like. I just like girls.
well,
I
I
like black girls.
definitely
I like
like
white
some weed
girls.
more than others.
Me
And the
too.
chunkier stuff, I always was obliged to do it as a seed company, especially back in the day, because I could find stuff that was absolutely delicious but take forever and yield nothing. But there's simply nobody to buy seeds for that. There's like maybe 1%, whereas if you had something that was a chunky, easy to grow, heavy yielder, still had some color, had some resin, then you'd sell all your seeds of those, right? So you had to, as a seed business, you had to compromise for yield over flavor. But I always dreamt of the day like, oh, this stuff that yields like, 70 grams a square meter. And you're like, nobody's ever going to grow this. But one day, if it was an open, free market and people could advertise to the highest bidder, like in wine, and say, okay, there's only so much of this made every year and it's going to go to the highest bidder just like wine. I mean, you can have $2 Chuck and you can have Domaine Roman Conti, right? There's a broader market, you know, once it's opened up. When it's closed, it kind of gets a commodity pricing. The pricing gets compressed at the bottom end and top end because the top end can't reach a wider market because it can only go to people they know in the black market. Whereas the I'm jabbed out. You want to see I just keep seeing them pop up, and I'm like, oh,
Don't just ignore
that's
that.
okay.
Unless
That's okay.
I just like to
The
put some of them up. One thing I'll say about Bujulero and these long flowering sativas is that they're so rare and so few people grow it that they've got the market cornered.
That's a
You know,
great niche. It's a great niche, and
yeah,
that's the fun stuff. Like you definitely see some people out there doing it, but hardly anybody. And it's really, to me, it's really fun because I really do appreciate the equatorial cannabis. And tropical cannabis in general can be interesting, but equatorial particularly, I find to have some of my favorite notes of cannabis. And it's unfortunate that in most of the equatorial places it's still illegal, so they never really got to the next phase of post-harvest excellence, let's say, because they're used to just cutting it down and hanging it in the bush or the barn, and the shit turns brown in a day or two, and it just
mm,
cooks off the terps. They're gone right away. But if you grow on the equator and snip a tray and take it right in and hang it up in air conditioning, keep it fresh, green, absolutely phenomenal. So it's a class of weed that you can't even find in dispensaries yet because growing that stuff indoors is not the same as growing it on the equator. You know, it's not. It's amazing what you can grow down there. There's lots you can't. Plus, there's the important thing to remember is most people are like, oh, you can't grow there. It's too wet. They have a dry season. You know, it's very important to remember that they
and
do
they have
have a
12
dry
hours of light.
season.
They have 12 hours of light the whole
Yeah,
year.
you can grow. I spent quite a long time growing on the equator, like 7 years, and I built rooms that had glass tops and windows, but there was no lights. I had aircon and dehumidifiers built in and all white walls, but no lights. It was just great, and it just lifts you up. Yeah, that's right.
My
Happy
my
Valley
question would
Farms.
be,
Yeah, it just lifts
Make,
you up, you know. But and you could grow anything you wanted in those rooms any time of year. And outside, if you were finishing in the dry season, almost everything works. You know, modern hybrids, almost everything works there finishing in the dry season, as long as you veg it first, you know, with some supplemental light. But the long flowering ones, you know, you can start them in May and finish them in December. You know, you might go through a rainy season in between, but they're vegging. They're not rotting in veg, you know. It's not till the last 2 weeks you got to worry about the rain and the buds, really, you know. So if you're finishing in the dry season, and the other thing is, it really brought to my attention growing down in warmer zones. I mean, on the equator, you can be in a cold, wet zone if you're at a high altitude, but there's lots of different options actually on the equator, really depending on altitude mainly. But the thing that always blew my mind was how much faster things finished. And I had to figure this out. And I've seen it sort of in 3 steps now. But what I'm hoping to have people on our forums help me validate, and this is why having the standardized clones out there, like you're doing with the verification codes and everything, is going to help with this endeavor. But if from seed, it's a little less obvious, but if everybody's growing the same clone and publishing their median, what I call it is the cannabis median heat units. Because in every other crop, we record heat units and we plant varieties based on the heat units in those areas. So for corn, they have CHUs, corn heat units. For grapes, they have degree ripening days between bud break and harvest. It's all based on the temperatures, you know, but predominantly adding up the highs is typically how they do it. And nobody's done this with cannabis yet, but I've seen it myself. And I say we have to quantify this. And it's better in a community, in a population. Whereas if anybody is growing out the same clones, it's not just your high every day, which is what the grape guys do and the corn guys, both of which I've been myself, right? So we look for these, you got to plant the right variety in the right band of heat, but the median heat counts. So you have to look at the night temperatures. You don't necessarily have to raise your daytime temperatures to see the difference. You can raise your nighttime temperature. So if you had a closet, you had a grapefruit in both closets, and you ran one at a high of 25 and a low of 15, I'm thinking Celsius, of course, and you ran another one with a high of 35 and a low of 25, if you started them flowering the same day, nice to see which one finish, you know? They have different median heat units, so you'll be able to see if the heat units make a difference for you. So I'm hoping that the people that are trying any of the cuts they can report on the forums I invited you to the other day. We're actually moving it from Stars and Stripes to Ganja Stand. So it's going to be the Ganja Stand forums. But yeah, we've had sort of beta forums on that seed site, but we're moving them. Anyway, that there is, I did post something about it on there. Anybody that's cool is welcome to join that forum. It is invite only, but you've got the codes for the next 2 months and you can share them with anybody that asks. If you like them, they're welcome, you know. Just try and keep it a little bit um, slower growing, but quality, you know, so it's not all just trolling and spam, you know. So it's by invite, it's cooler, you know. I think anyway. But we'll be able to do some interesting kind of group research projects that way if everybody can post their results and see when they finish.
you know,
Yeah.
one thing, I mean, there's a lot of benefits of it as far as like learning the way, you know, plants like to grow. But for me, the best marketing is when other people post what they think about my shit.
Mhm.
You know, because like I can tell you that I think my sour is the best sour that I've seen in a long time, but that doesn't mean shit until other people say, "Oh no, this sour is the best sour that I've seen for a long time." You know, so anytime I get clones to people or any type of genetics to people, I always tell them, hey, please share, your grow. If you don't
Absolutely.
want to
That
do
makes
it,
all the difference.
yeah, if you don't want to do it publicly, you can just send me a message, and we'll make it anonymous, right? But please document your grow. And back in the day when I first started, we would take Polaroids because we were scared to like
Yeah, same,
go
same.
develop film and stuff
Yeah,
like
no,
that.
that was an issue. I always laugh when people go, "Oh, why didn't you document everything on phones?" Like it was fucking illegal. It was a
Yeah.
liability to keep records of it, you know?
Well, I mean,
And
honestly, even worse um than the liability of keeping records, I thought, was just going to the film store to have them develop the film because they would rat you out. You'd think people that were into photography would be cool, but no, those fucking guys would just rat you out.
yeah,
And so, like, I mean, because by the time if you have a bunch of Polaroids, like, by the time, they found those, you're already busted, right?
yeah,
So, like,
yeah, but it's just the evidence. So they can say, you can say, well, this was the first time I did it, Your Honor, or no, you've been doing this for 5 years here, you know,
I mean, think about
because
this.
we've got all your records, you know.
If you have Polaroids, okay. I mean, depends on how the photographer. But you could say, hey, yeah, I took pictures of herb. This wasn't all my herb. If it's just the plants, I don't know. But my biggest thing was I was always just scared to go get the shit developed. That
There was the
you know.
developer in our town, and I'm sure they don't do this anymore, obviously, but they had the machine where the pictures came out of
Oh
was
yeah.
in glass in the mall. So like anybody could be standing there watching photos come out. And then so many times inappropriate photos came out while kids were standing there. I'm not saying read photos, just things that probably they didn't want their kids seeing, you know?
All types of
So
inappropriate
they
photos.
had to stop doing that. It was like I couldn't believe they did it to begin with. It was a weird thing.
But I encourage
You know,
everybody to document their grow, whether it's,
If you're
seeds,
legal, do
genetics,
it.
or stuff
If
that
you're
I do.
not,
Yeah,
it's up to you.
document your grow. And the other thing that I want people to do, and part of why we have this podcast network, is document your story. Like, I think documenting your story is so important because 30 years later, you're going to forget shit. Maybe, some people like, have a better memory than others, but everyone's forgetting and losing something. And um
I forget when
I
I walked into a room, but I can remember how any herb tasted I ever tried, you know? It's just a
yeah,
different thing, you know? Like, why
you
did
know,
I never take a shot?
there is this clone circulating in the late 90s or early 2000s in Austria, and was called Sweet Tooth Number Three,
That
and it
was
was
from
the
my place in
fastest.
Switzerland.
If, yeah, and it was the fastest finishing plant I remember now. You know, it was like in 52 days maybe it was over. You know, it was rock hard buds. It was really, really. It has no leaves almost. It just has rock hard buds. You
What
know.
year did you get that?
It was 2001 maybe. I get it
Oh yeah,
in. You can get it in
you
Graz.
got a
In
real
you
one. You
get it
got
in
the real
Aus.
ones,
In
you know. That
yeah,
was
yeah.
fresh.
Because it was so
I
different.
released that in 2001, Sweet Tooth 3. I made a couple of
Yeah.
versions of it because I had the same mother and father. So I was able to reproduce the exact Sweet Tooth 3 a few times. But the first one I released of it was the third back cross to grapefruit. So it was really stable too. Like when you planted Sweet Tooth 3, there wasn't a lot of variation, you know? It was very, very stable plant. And it was bred for lots of people to use because everybody had a favorite mother, but nobody had a stable male, you know. So I wanted to let people have a backboard to work with, you know, that you could bounce it off this, and then if you want to back cross to your thing, now you can. You can look for the males that match and try and get something stabilized of what you were working on. But when I was using blueberry as a backboard in that project, and it was very easy to separate out because the blueberry I used has solid purple stalks and very, very colorful, whereas the grapefruit has striations. So it had like that candy cane stripes on the side of the stalks, right? So if you're looking at males, you could tell pretty quick which were the blueberry ones because they're purple stalk ones is scrap, scrap, scrap. Because that line, the purpose was to try and make a stabilized grapefruit like seed. But I kept drifting a little bit away because I would find a male that was like, okay, this isn't the most like it as a male, but it's an incredible male. Like it would be super robust or mildew resistant, or there'd be something about it that I'm like, I have to use this one. It doesn't look exactly like the male version of the grapefruit, but it is, from the second back cross to it. It's got lots in there, but it wouldn't be exactly the same. So there was some drift from grapefruit to sweet tooth 3, but sweet tooth 3 was, really a great thing for people to work with. Ask about the male resin. Yeah, that blueberry male, that was the first time I saw a very resinous male, but that one had chromatic resin. It wasn't white, it wasn't clear, it wasn't amber. It was absolutely chromatic, like you were looking at ball bearings covered in oil. Like it looked like just shimmering, and it was amazing. The bud
Now,
was
is it
on that
trichomes
little male, it
that you
had a
tied?
tight little male cluster, like looked like upside down purple grapes, like a Pinot cluster, very tight cluster. And it was just covered with this shiny resin. It was like this royal purple. That's the only male top I ever smoked. I snipped that top and put it in a coffee cup for a week or so till it was dry enough. And I stuck it in my biggest bong bowl and took the whole thing at once, and it just tasted like blueberry jam. It was really, really regret not saving that male because it was really, I was like, oh, I'll find more. And I never saw one that like that again. But that was the nicest one because the sisters of it, I culled. I
Mhm.
didn't even let them finish the three females. They were shit. And the other male looked like the shit sisters. So I culled that too. I only kept the one male of the five blueberry seeds I tried at the time. And yeah, it was that
And
one
was that
was such a gem.
trichomes?
And actually, DJ Short was in my backyard and saw it. He was came up while it was growing. We were introduced, and I said, "Oh, come on over, and I've got one of your males I'm just about to use."
Now, was that trichomes on that male?
Yeah, yeah, just covered.
I've never seen that.
No, it was the nice. I've seen resin on
I've never
males
seen a
before.
photo on it of it.
I've seen resin. You can find resinous males. There's more and more of them out there, but that one was exceptional. That last question was about what other breeders have done well with that sweet tooth. I
I
would
can
have
go
to.
back.
First one that comes to mind is Hortifarm or Hortilab. Sorry, Hortilab, not Hortifarm. Hortilab is a guy that he's in Vienna, Austria now, but he was in Germany and Amsterdam and now in Austria. And he used to come from Germany and work for me part time now and then. And that was mostly trimming but sometimes in the greenhouses, like tying up plants and stuff, he'd come with some buddies from Germany and, get his hands sticky. And of course, I always sent them home with seeds and cuts and a tire full of weed or something. They would come and work and then stuff kilos in the tires and put it in there. We had a guy nearby that would load tires for us so he could take the weed back to Germany. But
You were
yeah,
in
so he
Switzerland
took
at
all
that
my
time,
cuts
right?
back there, and he got grapefruit and sweet tooth and shishkaberry all over Germany for like all the 2000s. They were pretty common there, I think. You know. But anyway, it was going back, going back.
Um, Tell us about some of your international, like stuff that you've done besides in Canada, like you were just talking about in Germany and stuff like that. I'm sure our international
Well,
co-host would love to talk about that.
I had like just about 4 years in Europe from 99 2003, mainly in Switzerland, but the last while in Spain. And then I was back in Canada making wine, raising my family, staying out of controversy, and just staying high. I wasn't worried about cannabis business. When I left Switzerland, it was a big headache. And that's a story I've told a few times, but it was about how the Pope shut down the weed scene on us there. But it was
I
really,
think you
I
should
blame,
tell it. 'Cause
what's
I
that?
haven't heard. I think you should tell it because I haven't
All
heard it.
right, all right. So what happened was In Switzerland at the time, they'd never made growing cannabis illegal. Growing any plant wasn't illegal, but what you did with it could be illegal. And there's 36 cantons in Switzerland, and they really have quite a bit of autonomy each one. So some of them could be more permissive about it, some of them less permissive. But essentially, the plant was legal, hash bars weren't. You know, you could have a shop selling kilos of weed, but you couldn't sell bongs there, you know? So you could do it either way, right? You could be a bong shop or a weed shop, but you couldn't be both, you know? And it wasn't legal to consume it, but of course it's tolerated at your home. Maybe not if you're sitting out in the main square downtown or something. But what happened was it got so popular with the neighbors that when I neighbors, I mean the Italians and Austrians and French and Germans and stuff, where weed was highly illegal and very expensive. So it was suddenly being widely produced in Switzerland, and the neighbors would take the risk to come and buy it and take it home. So that's their problem. The way the Swiss see it, the Swiss are they're all about bring your money. You know, they bring your money. They're all about that. But what happened was there's a town called Chiasso on the Swiss side and Como on the Italian side, but it really from the air it looks like one town on Lake Como. But in the middle of the main street, there's a border checkpoint. And if you went from the Italian side into the Swiss side, there was pot leaf sandwich boards up and down the sidewalks on both sides of the street, like right within plain view of the border guys, right? But so many people would come over, and the smallest pack was 5 grams and the sacchetti profumati. Yeah, people would come in, buy their 5 grams, and go back. And like border guards just gave up. They had to change the law in Italy to say they don't have to charge everybody they find. They can just take it away if it's 5 grams or less. Because they couldn't stop everybody that was coming and going. It was, you know, the volume of people won. Once you get that critical mass of civil disobedience, they just throw up their hands. So it kind of felt like we were winning in a way, but then an investigative reporter from Rome came up, walked over the border, walked into a shop with his hidden camera and hidden mic, and said, and these were like VHS things, probably with the camera, like a duffel bag or something, with a screen on the end. And he walked in. I won't name the guy or the shop, but I have in the past actually, but it doesn't really matter. But they went in and he said to the guy, "Oh, this weed is beautiful. You've got all this super frosty weed and great white shark and white widow and all these things." And he says, "Man, you know what this stuff goes for in Rome? I fucking wish I could get this in Rome." And he says, "Hey, we do 24 hours free delivery anywhere in Italy, you know?"
Oof.
And that was it. That went on the Italian news in Rome. And then the Pope had his people call the head prosecutor and said, do something about this, you know? So then the head prosecutor, being a good Catholic and all, says, well, it's not illegal to sell weed, but we can do investigation of them, you know? So then they just started to make everybody's lives miserable and started this big roundup of 100 companies and put yellow tape on their doors and wanted records. And really, we weren't doing anything wrong because we weren't selling weed publicly retail like that. I was making seeds and I had lots of receipts for seeds, all legal export, all declared. I was getting employee taxes rebated at the end of the year because we were declared an export manufacturer. It was all on the up and up. So at the end of the day, I didn't have a problem, but it became a hassle, So I just said, well, you know what? I'm out of here. So once it got to be a hassle, I sold my place to Shanty Baba actually, and then I moved to the south of Spain for the last winter I was there. And then I came back to Canada and started a winery and made wine for 15 years. And the last few years of that, I got back into opening a cannabis company down in Colombia. So I got one of the early licenses there and spent about 7 years growing down there before I parted ways with the other owners that we had different visions at that point. So, and I'd already started another place in Thailand by then. I had some overlap and my Thai project is still going nicely and my partner there is a sweetheart, really, really awesome. So we started quite early on that because we had a hemp license before they did the whole descheduling. So we had sort of a 2 year head start to start growing CBD plants in greenhouses, and then we were just ready because we were just gambling on them. They're going to come around. They're going to come around. We kind of smell it in the wind, right? So you're like, we just want to be ready to, tear out all these these things and be able to plant the real deal right away, once it comes. So we were ready to hit the ground running. And, like with most projects, there's the odd hiccup getting going, but overall, it's had its ups and downs, but it's still going and better than ever. And my partner there, Fi, has gone from a non-grower to a really fantastic grower. So it just warms my heart. Even in Switzerland, I had people working in my trim camp, like the trim immigrants. There would be like up to 40 of them in the summer as I was cycling through like that greenhouse work, and they were trimming the best either for trimming or for making cuttings because I had a nursery going where we sold a fair bit of cuttings in Switzerland. My best worker was a young lady from Thailand who was my electrician's girlfriend, actually. So she didn't have a work visa in Switzerland. She was there visiting her boyfriend, but he would drop her off so she could come and just do path work at my place. And she was doing 3 times the volume of clones of anybody else. Most of them were doing like 400 or 500 clones in a day, and she was doing 1,500. And her trays looked better, her trays rooted better. Like she was just another on another level compared to everybody else. So I was always in awe of the Thai work ethic. I was always in awe of it. And because she was the first Thai person I ever met, I think, and she was, well, I'm not counting restaurants or whatever, but just like, wow, she killed it. And so in Thailand, my partner's got her family working there and her extended family working there and the main employer in the village. So it's really awesome to see. And of course, once you get into that many of them, they're not all highballers. There's the odd, like, drunken uncle that's not quite keeping up. But overall, really great work ethic. And I just always happy to, at least not, I really had good experience working in Thailand. And hope that continues because it's really a pleasure. And it's such a relief. Colombia was really overregulated and it had quotas, which were really throttling the industry, especially at the beginning. They became a little faster in granting them later on, but you couldn't plant anything until you had a quota for it. So you had to have like a verified sale. And it was really unrealistic, especially at first. So we had the hardest time because we were the lead group and we always had to educate the regulators. Like we were allowed to keep 4 mother plants for all the genetics, just as backup plants. But if you had an order to make, 10 kilos of distillate and you needed all, they know how much distillate you get per square meter of this variety and blah, blah, blah. So you've got, okay, we see you need 20,000 plants to make this little crop. Let's, you've got 4 now, so you've got to make mothers of from those cuttings and then make more cuttings and then make more cuttings until you have enough. And then you're like, okay, well, this is going to take 6 months before we have enough cuttings to plant. It's June now, and you want the quota expires at the end of, at New Year's. Like that's not the plant cycle, isn't the calendar. So it was anyway, it was a huge frustration. They ended up getting, we pushed them past that where they would let your quota continue into the next year. Because what do you got? You want to have it set up to harvest daily, ideally at the equator. And you might have a month that's super wet like May where nobody can go in the field because it's just knee deep mud. But mostly you can you can plan on harvesting daily for a good chunk of the year, but not with the quota system. So it's a huge pain in the ass. Whereas in Thailand, we had no quota system. And as a breeder, it really fucked me in Colombia because the people that grant the quotas wouldn't give them for high populations. So I'd say, I want to grow this, and I want to grow 10,000 seeds of each thing, or I want to plant 10,000 seeds of each thing. I might only finish 100 because I'm going to cull them every 2 weeks. I'm going to keep culling them at every transplant, but I start 10,000 seeds of each thing. And they say, no, Nobody starts more than 200 seeds. You don't need more than 200 seeds to make selections. I'm like, but I'm breeding. That's what I do is make selections from big populations. And I'm here so I can do it outside all the time because the weather's good most of the year. Like, really, I can't set up a very expensive facility and then be told I can only plant 200 seeds of each line. But I mean, I would never have signed up if those regs were the thing because it was not workable at that point. But when we had got the license, those weren't the regs. It wasn't like we agreed to these shitty regs. They changed the regs 2 months after we got the license. So it was really a pain in the ass.
Oh my God.
Thailand,
The
no fucking quotas, very easy reporting requirements, and it's just a pleasure to do it. Whereas most of the places, the red tape and taxes and bureaucracy, they just suck the life out of the legal industry. The original, when I got to Switzerland, that's still the ideal to me. Legal, not licensed. And that's really what that's true north. We gotta keep remembering that it's not about rescheduling for sure. Everybody knows descheduling is where it's at. And we'll never
100.
shut up until you get it. And that's just in the American context, but everywhere else too. Like it's not acceptable, that they restrict homegrown or this or that. Homegrown is fundamental. That's where we gotta have that at the very least. I would rather I would rather if they had to pick one or the other, commercial or homegrown, you got to give it homegrown first.
I agree.
Before anybody's allowed to sell it, I have to be able to grow my own. That's just non-negotiable. You know, Whereas it's like saying you have to eat in a restaurant all the time. Like, I like to eat at a restaurant now and then, but I do like to cook at home too.
Amanda here had a question.
That's a good
I
one,
don't,
Amanda Huggins. Swear to you. That's it. So the Vero sense is very similar to fem seeds. So depending on how stable the parent is, you're gonna see it fall apart afterwards. If you can fix the trait in something, um, that's really the thing about Verosense. It fixes the trait of whichever plant you select, you're locking it in. So if I take a polyhybrid and it's AB crossed with CD, but I really want one that looks like it's exactly a quarter of each. It has the color of this one, the potency of this one, the smell of this one. You've got what's your goal with that cross? What's the ideal plant to you, right? So if I can take that polyhybrid and grow out 10,000 of them and find the one that most closely approaches that ideal, then I lock it in. You know, I do the Verosense and make that an infertile version of itself so that it is exactly like that forever. And the way you know the infertile versions and these aren't triploids, which is what a lot of people jump to, but they're not. There's a couple distinguishing features. One, absolutely no hairs. You can't find a single stigma on the bud, not a single one. If you can find a single one, it's not the same. So if the other thing about it is those cuttings from the true steriles, they root in 3 to 4 days, and their fertile sisters take 10, 12 days. So spotting them is a question of selections and locking them down. So we'll see as we go on, how that plays out. I'm pretty excited about it. I have about 10 breeders involved right now. And last week was the first week I started onboarding the people that are going to handle the B2B sales. And it won't be released to the public probably for another year or two. I'm going to just license it out to commercial producers for about a year or two. And at that point, we all know they're going to leak out. If they send those, and it can make any plant an infertile version of it. Okay. So,
it,
Shishkaberry, I don't have anything working on it right now. I'm not in the midst of working on it right now. I have some interesting versions of it that I could get to work with, so I want to re-release it at some point, but I'm not, even other times I've had a few false starts where I started and there was an issue. So I'm not going to jinx it by saying, oh, it'll be ready by June or something, because I don't know. But I definitely do want to bring back some Shishka for sure. I get asked 5 times a day for it, so I really have to, that's for sure. But working in the different countries with the median brings me kind of circle back to the median heat units. Was I was finding like a cutting that I thought of as an 8 weeker indoors in my light depth greenhouses was always finishing in 7 weeks. And I didn't realize because I wasn't checking the heat. I was just thinking, oh, we were doing 11, 13 on the light depth. So it was the extra long night. Just assumed that was it because we weren't keeping track of the heat high and low, right? But then when I started growing, and I kind of forgot about it for a while after that, but they were definitely like repeatedly finishing a week faster than inside to the same degree of doneness. But then when I started growing the same things on the equator in a warm zone, where I would have a low of 24 Celsius. The highs might go up to 40 Celsius, but the lows weren't going below 24 on the crop. I started to really take notes and take numbers and keep track of this from the data logger. The plants there were finishing in 6 weeks. So what I thought of an 8 week clone that I saw 7 weeks in a warmer greenhouse that had, just warmer overall temps than I typically kept my indoor. I like keeping my indoor cool to get the colors and it was always a thing to keep our indoors cool. And that's still not a bad thing. It gives you tightness, it gives you freshness. But man, I was getting tight ass buds on the field in really warm conditions, and there was nothing left to fill in. Like they were as tight as they could be at 6 weeks. So a 60-day indoor plant was 45 days in that warm environment. So that was when I said we got to start making notes of heat units for cannabis and not copy corn and grapes, which are similar but different, but really on an indoor level, it's easy to check because we just go from the time we flip to flowering. On an outdoor, it's harder to control. And that's why I'd like a wider group of people reporting on their results because outdoors, depending on your latitude, you've got very different photo period and flowering time. So when do you consider the flip? It's kind of I don't know the answer to that. So there's got to be a way to say, like with corn, it's from when you plant the seed, right? From grapes, it's from when the bud break, because that's a perennial. It comes back, those vines, right? So in that regard, cannabis would be more like the corn, where you're just sowing the field. But when do you consider the flip? So I haven't really got my head around that, but I think as long as we note it in the report of the cannabis median heat unit per clone. So if you take a Chem 91 clone and you stick it outside in Florida or you stick it outside in Michigan, it's not going to finish at the same time. And if it finishes at all, it might be too humid for it. I don't know. I'm not an expert on it, but on the Chem 91, I've never grown Chem 91. Like last year, I was sent some crosses of it to try, and they were all nice, and I've enjoyed smoking it whenever I've had it, but I never grew a straight Chem. So
Well, we'll have to
I
get
don't,
you some.
well, yeah, I'm just saying I don't know it well. I appreciate it, but I don't know it well. But yeah, it'd be really interesting to map a common clone for the finishing times at the different latitudes, but also to track the heat units through the grow season and start layering that data. But for indoors, it's very easy to check those temperature reports. So even if you don't have two to do side by side, you do yours your way and just upload how long it took and a photo of how ripe it is, because everybody's got a different idea when it's ready. But let's start seeing how long it takes. And if the peoples that are a little warmer or cooler, maybe I'm totally wrong and it's something different. But yeah, definitely, definitely.
I mean, it could be
The
a combination of things, like the
That's right.
the different
But I
color
think
of.
we can't rule out the fact that heat units affect the ripening of every other fucking crop, but they haven't been quantified
Oh
in cannabis. That's kind of a
no,
gross oversight at this point,
I
you know?
agree. I mean,
Yeah.
even we've been talking about differential between day-night temperature,
Mhm.
with cannabis from the earliest
Makes a
books that
difference
I've
how
read.
far the spread is, yeah. Yeah, for sure.
So temperature is obviously a factor in growing
Yeah, it's
plants.
just
So
it's one of these things that's easy for us to study as a community. We can layer up a bunch of data onto the same thread for people that are interested in contributing to it, just sort of an open source research project, where we can see, and you don't need any fancy equipment. Everybody's got a thermometer already. That's maybe a high-low thermometer if you don't yet, but
I mean, even the data loggers are not that expensive anymore.
that's true.
It
No,
used to be
that's
something
true.
that you'd have to spend so much money for, but that's probably one of the most useful tools a grower can have is a data
Temporary,
logger
yeah.
because the high and the low don't tell you as much. And you know,
Well,
they
they
tell you
help
about the extreme,
for
they
the
help, but
risk
like
aspect, yeah.
for instance, let's say your low temperature is only for a brief period of time,
Mhm.
okay? That's not going to affect you as if your low temperature is for a
Half the
long time,
time. Right,
right?
right,
So,
right.
so that's
Yeah.
why you need to have a data logger that tells you, every minute in the day, graphing what your temperature is, so you can see, you know.
Yeah, if it spends a lot more time at a hot temperature and a short time at a small one, it affects that median. But the like the
Like
medians,
here's an example, and I don't want to do too much math because I'll embarrass myself. But like for instance, let's say when your lights are on, it's 100 degrees, and when your lights are off, it's 50 degrees. Okay. And if you're just looking at the average now, that's 75, you might think that's okay. You really need a data logger, to
it's
know.
better to have a data logger, no question, no
Yeah,
question.
and they're incredibly cheap these days.
Yeah.
Like that technology is very inexpensive. Where, back when this started, that would have been, you know, a lot of money for something just to give you information, not even control things.
Yeah,
So
not even control, just to see it.
yeah,
And outdoors they make a huge difference because you can't control the weather. Indoors you can program it, so it's less of an issue because you set the temperature inside, you set it, so it doesn't really whether you log it or not, you know what it is because you already set the bloody temperature. You have
but
the
like
logger for
for instance,
backup for sure to check it.
but when you log it, you can say, oh, this time I got the best crop ever. What did I do? Okay, and you can see that, and you can try to duplicate it because
Or if there
you
was
know,
something different there, yeah.
right? So or like for instance, if you grow a crop, let's say you get 4 crops in a year, and you're like, man, that second one was the best. Well, now you have all the data that you can use to try to do it the same. Obviously the climate's one part. You also need to know the
Your feed
the
and stuff.
nutrient side, and also how'd you grow the plants, right? Like it's not everything, but it gives you a lot of data.
Do
Yeah.
that.
So hey,
The more the merrier.
the sweet pink grapefruit. Um, I want to personally know more about it since it's going to be something that we're going to be offering, and it seems like it was like such a pivotal part of all your breeding that you did.
Well, it was definitely, strong minds came out of that one. So that was a cut when I think I mentioned earlier, but when I first moved to Vancouver, I was like 23 or something, 20, probably, I can't remember, 23, 24, 23, 23. I was collecting every cut from anybody I knew in town and also any seeds, and there was lots of hippies that would go to India or, travel around. So there was lots of interesting things to try out if you were in the puffer scene, let's say. Um, but grapefruit was one that weed dealer that was a friend of a friend, she had this weed that was, sort of standard Vancouver mid to low grade where it was they cut it at 6 weeks. I think she's like, "Oh, the guy said it's done in 6 weeks or something." I was like, "Well, it's not done. That's the problem. It's all immature buds with lots of red hair." And it was, but it had like a faint sweetness to it. It wasn't super strong, but it was pleasant to smoke. But it was like, I bet you I could grow this really nice if I could finish it, you know? So I was like, does this guy sell cuts of this? And she's like, yeah, the minimum orders, 20 cuts for $5 each. So I was like, fine, $100. Take grab me a tray, you know. So he gave me a small tray of clone and I put them on my balcony. I was in Kitsilano at the time, right on a main street called Broadway. I was right at the intersection of Broadway and U on, one not on the ground floor, but the next floor and had a very big terrace there, and well, relatively big terrace for a one-bedroom apartment, let's say. And I had all the plants I'd found that year growing. I had my terrace was just covered. I had a few tomatoes too, so it looked like there might have been a few flowers and the things, but it was like 90% cannabis. And you could see it from the main street below where the buses went by. And people on the buses would be like pointing and waving at me. And I mean, it wasn't even med legal then. There was no, there was no compassion clubs or anything, right? It was still just illegal. And it was funny to see building across from me was taller, and I'd see people look out the windows and point and wave, and they loved it. People just thought it was awesome, and it was Vancouver was very tolerant. I was a young shrub at the time, you know, and I just kind of just didn't give a fuck. I believed in mens rea. There's like a in Canadian law, at least, you have a guilty action and a guilty mind to become a crime. And I said, well, I don't have a guilty mind, therefore it's not a crime. So it may be contradictory to what they want to see growing on my balcony, but I had zero guilt about it. I'm doing this wide open, right? So just like, a challenge almost, but I didn't want to get raided and lose it, but I still wasn't about to not do it either. So I was I was checking it out, and anytime people came over, when that clone, which they called the only thing worth growing, they didn't really have a name for it. So what do you call that stuff? And they're like, the only thing worth growing. I was like, okay, well, I'll think of a better name once it grows. So once it grows out, to me, I'm like, oh my God, it's like the real ruby red, like a sweet pink grapefruit covered in sugar, like just delicious breakfast grapefruit, you know? And it was unmistakable. And anytime friends came by, which was frequently because I was selling herb, so people would come by and I'd say, what does this one smell like to you? Like I get them to go smell everything on my terrace. And then when they got to that one, I'd say, what does this one smell like? And they would all smell it and go, it was really ripe by now. It was big, swollen buds, not like the little red-haired dog shit we'd always seen of it. And everybody said, that smells like a sweet pink grapefruit. And everybody said that. I didn't get a different answer from anybody. So I'm like, well, that's what we got to call it, sweet pink grapefruit. And yeah, in retrospect, because I tried to find out anything about it, and what I'd heard was that guy had had it 17 years, and he'd got it from somebody that had had it longer than that, and they thought that it came up from Washington as a Northern Lights number 1. I have no way of verifying that. That's just what I was told later, but it wouldn't surprise me at all because they were very similar to what I thought of. The first time I grew Northern Lights, it was a Northern Lights number 2. And the next time I grew it, it was the 5. And the 5 wasn't as good as the 2. And the 1 was quite different than either one, but it's a lot sweeter, assuming that grapefruit is that. I don't know that it is. So it's kind of a mystery. Um, it would be nice to have it sequenced and know. Maybe it's been sequenced and somebody knows. I can't tell you for sure. But it really is just kind of a nice all rounder because it was fairly easy to grow, very, very sweet. It brought sweetness to a lot. It really did. To me, that's like gotta be one of the foundational things in the candy fam would have to be that to me, because that's the first thing I knew that was making candy crosses. The the things it was crossed with, whenever you cross it, you would see some come down more like Northern Lights. Like when it got crossed with a Northern Light haze, The sweet skunk was the outlier, the one that got called sweet skunk eventually. I called it big fruit. I had two narrow leaf plants. I planted 500 seeds of that first of the cross with the grapefruit and the northern light haze, believing the male to be a big skunk at the time. And I found out later it was a northern light haze anyway. But I had named that cutting and the seeds I made the big fruit. I just called it big fruit. But Emery was out of skunk seeds at the time, and he said, you know, because I thought it was a big skunk that I hit it with until later. And he says, "Oh, I'm just going to call it sweet skunk because sweet been grapefruit and skunk." And he didn't ask me; he just put it on the catalog like that. I sold it to him as big fruit, but the clone that's known as sweet skunk, the clone only sweet skunk, is really a beautiful haze. It's like a sweet haze, basically, you know? So it's, could have called it Steve's haze as much as like Neville's haze. Neville didn't make haze, but he made his version of haze, you know? If anything, I could call that Sweet Skunk Steve's haze because it's kind of my only haze family line, right? But man, it is truly delicious, and I never like to run out of it. If I like to always have some of that in jars, whether as flour and or extract. And thankfully, I do have both. But but I have to freshen it up now and then. You know, I grew one last year to freshen it up, so I had some more. It's I really never get tired of it. It's one of those ones that you just once you get a taste for it, and it's always the ladies'
Cannot
favorite.
stop.
All my friends that grow stuff, no matter what they've got in the house, their wife's favorite always is the sweet skunk. You know, it's just a lady's favorite. I find it wild and crazy.
You know, you definitely know there is this Alpine seed company was in Switzerland, and they made, I think your sweet pink grapefruit was close to Erdbeerly, you know.
Oh yeah,
And you know
yeah.
the Erdbeerly is a Switzerland
The
strain, and
strawberry.
I grew this, you know, and but I never got a hold on onto the real sweet pink grapefruit from you. You know, I just saw the crosses, but it was the trait was it was you know it was pink, it was sweet, you know, it was very
Yeah,
dominant
yeah.
in the cross. I think you know
Yes,
it
very
got
dominant in
through,
the
right?
cross. Every time you cross it with stuff, it ends up taking over. I saw there was a
Yes,
French guy that he made some reproductions of the Sweet Tooth 4 on his own, like not related to me or anything, but he asked me if he could do it, which is polite, and respectful. So I said, go ahead. At least you asked
of
me. There's
course.
tons of people making knockoffs of my seeds from way back when. And
Yeah, yeah.
generally speaking, they're not asking you. They're just making knockoffs because your names are popular and nobody's looking for theirs, right? So I definitely do have an issue with the knockoff boys because I'd get complaints about seeds I hadn't sold in 20 years. I'm like, I haven't sold in 20 years. And when they're like, oh, I just got this seed. I was like, oh, those are knockoff seeds from that dude. Don't bitch to me about them, you know? But I just hate it. It feels like it brings down the legacy of it, you know? Like and this was a big thing you see in Canada. Shishkaberry was a huge seller in the legal market for the first few years, and I think they still grow and sell it. But it wasn't my Shishkaberry. Shishkaberry was my name, but it was a knockoff of my Shishkaberry. So they're selling, many, many tons of that in the legal market in Canada. None of it's authentic Shishkaberry.
You were like
Uh,
the first LCG, right? Because like when the lemon cherry gelato craze happened recently, everybody just started calling that shit lemon cherry gelato before,
right,
right? So it's just
right.
like whatever's hot, just say that that's what your shit is.
I know it's painful. So it's just, if you do, put some effort into your work and then you just see everybody stepping on it. I mean, I want to see people use it and I'm happy for them to make reproductions of it, particularly if they give it their own name, but because their version isn't the same one I released, the one I released had that name. When you release it, you got to call it something else or you're just a dick, to me, that's all there is to it. Like if you're selling seeds and you're not selling them with original names because your seeds are original. You made them. You didn't use the same parents I used. Give them a new name. You can say, this is my F2 or my S1 of whatever and credit it that way. But at least have a little respect and a little dignity and put an original name on it, Don't just look like you're riding the coattails. There's lots of that. Anyway,
Yeah.
that's
And I
always
mean,
been a little
truth is,
bugbear.
the truth is, you know, that's true. And then there's the opposite. I mean, like famous Dutch seed banks did the same thing, right?
Yeah,
Like, they all sold the same shit under different names, said that they made it. It's just common practice, unfortunately. Like people don't have
it's
integrity.
because it's not common practice if you were selling pop or if you were selling corn seeds. It's not common practice. It's
No,
common
just the
practice
herb.
when people can't back up their IP. Because of prohibition. That's why it's common practice. If the Dutch guys could sell seeds, but the North American guys couldn't, not much we could do about the Dutch guys. We can't really declare what our problem is. Super kind, Mace. Okay. Glad you like it.
Yeah, so why don't you tell people about your verification program that you have, and let's
Yeah,
announce to everybody how we're going to be beginning to do some work
yeah.
together.
This is cool. This is, obviously, especially after three decades, the origins of clones get to be a little bit sketchy. Where did this cut come from? Where it's common with everything. This isn't just a me problem, but it's like, is this a real grapefruit? Or where did you get it from? I thought, you know what? It would be really nice to start a system right on of tracking from, a few starting points and say, okay, so he's getting a grapefruit and a sweet skunk from a friend of mine in Southern California, and he's getting a sweet tooth 3.1 from a friend of mine in Washington. And he'll start with those. And then every time he prints it out, the way this certificate of authenticity is going to come with it, there's a number, a code for every single cut that goes out. And the code starts with the verified dealer number. So I don't remember what number Gabby used, maybe 007 or something like that. But it'll be like 007 dash, and then the plant code. And that might be SPGSC for SoCal, SPG SoCal. But I know that SoCal cutting came from a friend of mine in Canada that I've grown the cuts of it he has. So I know exactly the short line from me to him. Other one that's on the East Coast went through many more hands. Still looks like the real deal, and it could be the real deal, but one of those lines, it might have a viroid or something. So it's still nice to keep them separate where the cuts originated from. And then anybody can grow those two grapefruits side by side and say, hey, you know what? They're the same or they're not the same. Let's see. I'm pretty sure they should be fine. But yeah, you've got the certificate of
I don't know if you
authenticity.
can
So
see
you'll
that. Let
have
me
the
lower the brightness
plant
a little.
identifier, and then you'll have the cutting number at the end of it. So it'll be 007 dash SPG SoCal dash 0001. The first one that Gabby sends out will be 0001. Next one he sends out will be 0002. And then, people, of course, can maintain their privacy, but if they want to participate, they can etch in on we have a spreadsheet of them on my website so people can track which ones came from where and say, okay, well, you can't have two that say 0003 or there's somebody's lying, right? So you can register, you accepted, you've got this plant and we've got it noted. Anybody that wants to get it from you can see that too. So even if, as things look like they may be going backwards for the sale of cuttings and seeds in the US, at least people will have something physical, even if they told all our websites are down in a year from the new bill or whatever. Not that that's entirely likely, but it's possible, right? That they could start. Nobody's going to stop doing it unless they start busting people. Like
Yeah.
the horses left the barn, right? Nobody's going to fucking voluntarily stop it because I won't say nobody, but a lot of people are going to continue on business as usual, I'm sure. But at least for the next year, there's a grace period for the new law that's coming, right? Yeah. And
Yeah.
if you have a physical thing and then later you can check it, hey, this is the certificate, this was the plant number, I did get this one from this line. And if later we see a problem in a line, we can cut it off. We say, wait a sec, this guy's, got a fucking virus or something, but the other guys don't. Let's kill that line. Let's just say don't. And we have a clean one to draw on, right?
Right.
So and then also for the research stuff. And I like that you liked the idea so much when I first told you. You said, "Is it okay? I'm going to copy your idea." And I said, "No, every seed breeder can copy this idea. I think it's really a good thing for every nursery and every seed breeder to have a little ledger. You don't want it to necessarily be." Your home address and phone number, everything, but you could put your, forum handle or your extra email you use for weed stuff or whatever if you want, and that's optional. You don't have to, be own that you have one. You can buy one without anybody knowing. It's mainly just so we don't start seeing replicas of the same number, where we say,
Mm-hmm.
well, that guy's bullshit because he just printed that certificate himself because somebody else already has number three. So anyway, we'll see how this is going. And this is so it's kind of a just a fun project to help people keep straight what they're getting because it drives me nuts because I'll get pictures of people all the time. They send me a picture of their veg plant. Is this a real shishka berry? Like, well, fuck, from your veg plant, I really can't tell you. There's been like 5 companies making shishka berries. I don't know what you got from who. Some of them made them from mine. Some of them probably just used the name. Beats me. But there's like literally been an industry of people knocking off sweet tooth and shishkaberry for decades. That's been very commonly knocked off those ones. But I think having the verified cuts will be nice because a lot of people prefer cuts to seeds, and there's good reasons for that. A lot of people prefer seeds, and I can appreciate that too. But I've got a couple guys lined up. Both our friend Horta Lab owns Clone Lab in Austria, so he'll be flipping these in Europe soon. And then other friends in Spain are going to be selling them, and hopefully in other countries too. But at the very least, those cuts will be Austria, Germany through Clone Lab, and through Spain through another friend. And the one in Spain, actually, we be nice to get this back to North America too. There's a sweet tooth three cutting that was, hunted in the Basque Country. I used to send lots of seeds to the Basque Country, and even wholesale amounts. There's guys there that would, buy armload of them. They would just love them. But they said this sweet tooth recutting was out through some grow stores that have redistributed. They said it's the same cutting all over the Basque Country, and tons of guys have it there. And so one of the guy has it and sent me pictures. He says, this one, I've had it 20 years. This was from 2001 Sweet Tooth. Everybody still keeps it. It's hugely popular here. So I said, man, I bet there's people in the rest of Europe that would like to see that. So he's gonna add it. Right now, I said I'm gonna have him, or I'm waiting for his current crop to come down so that my delegate can smoke it for me because it's my old distributor Carullo in Barcelona, and he was my main distributor probably in Spain for a while, and he's starting to sell my seeds again over there. But I've said, Carullo, I want you to smoke this guy Sweet Tooth 3 just to confirm it for me. But I'm, from the pics even, I'm pretty sure, and from the story, because I know those grow shops that were selling the seeds, and that's where the guy get that cut. So I'm like, oh, yeah, that's probably the real thing. But it looks really good. It's a great cut no matter what. And there's a few guys in Spain with old shishkaberry cuts too. I don't know whose is the best yet. I kind of want to go over and visit them and smoke them before I add them to the program. But gradually, we're going to keep adding some new options, and then hopefully those old shishka berries and that different sweet tooth line because it's going to be different than the one coming from Washington. They both started as sweet tooth three, but they could be sisters. But the 3.1 from Washington was because my friend was shutting down. He'd had this same cut forever, and then he had to shut down for a bit, so he did an S1 of it. and then he grew that all out again. So for like the last 5 years or something, he's just been growing the S1 he made from the Sweet Tooth 3. And I said, well, we'll call it 3.1 because it really is looks like Sweet Tooth 3 to me. He even fooled me on it because I didn't know he'd made an S1. I was like, I can't believe you still got that cutting going. It just looks perfect. It looks exactly. He's like, actually, this is an S1. It's not even the original cut from that. He had been sending me pics of that. He actually sent me this beer stein I'm gonna show you.
I can't make it out.
He pack a Sweet Tooth 3 for me to autograph.
Oh, that was a pack
Like,
of the
that's
seeds.
pretty crazy, you know? But it was, probably 20 years after it was released when he brought it up to be autographed. And people were asking earlier what we were smoking, and I just had a good dab of this amnesia haze rosin right when we came on. So that's why I wasn't smoking a joint because I was like, I get freshly dabbed out, I can talk for 2 hours. Yeah.
Well,
What did that
good.
one say? I didn't see it.
That's the plan, is to sit here and just talk for a couple of hours. Hey, and just in case you didn't know, and Sasha didn't tell you, but the Slovenian Hobbit has a nursery in Austria.
Oh,
So,
super,
and we're trying
super.
to get him a bunch of our genetics already.
Oh, great.
So,
So you must know Clone Lab. You know
I
Heard of
know
that.
Clone Lab, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I never met him personally, but I know
Oh,
about
yeah,
him and I
he's
know
a
about
nice
his
guy.
nursery. He's a professional, I know.
Yeah, I've known him since he was very young, like he literally started into cannabis part-time working at my place in Lugano. Yeah, that's super funny. But I was so happy to see him doing well. He was always very kind and respectful, and he did a lot to get those genetics spread around and made new things with them. And yeah, he's a good friend. Yeah, I really like him. So
You know, in Austria there is like, a lot of these shops are selling clones, but most of the shops are like resellers. But
right,
there are a few shops that are like having their own selection and their own library of cuts, which is good
good.
for the market because it's a big diversity if it's like that. So
Hmm.
we are competing the ones that are more conscious ones, I would say, more into for the culture. We have our own libraries. And there are no knockoff shops that buy from me and they make their own stock from that and they just resell it. And the next year they have a new selection, because they just buy what is popular right now. But in
Yeah,
our
sure.
facility we have like very old cuts also, which everybody tossed in the history, in the past. There was like, we have like a plank cut, you maybe know that. It's a Santa Maria. It's a no mercy supply genetic from the 90s. And there is this Shiva cut that we have from the 90s. It's from Sensi Seeds, obviously, which is a 97 cut, from the Shiva.
Wow.
And there is some other older cuts, like a White Widow we have. We don't know the origin, if it's the real one or not, but it's 20 years old. It's still.
That's
And we
interesting.
have a Shishka berry, but it's not, I don't think it's yours. I got it like 10 years ago in Graz. It's a
Right.
smaller town,
Send me
south of
some pics
Vienna.
of it. I'd like to see it just out of curiosity.
Yeah, yeah, I will. And
and
there is a
well,
whole new selection of American genetics that is flowing in right now. And it is like, some are really, interesting. Some are, the thing is that right now, there is a popular cut. It's called Dante's Inferno number 8. It's like everybody wants it,
What's it called? I
or
couldn't hear you.
like Dante's Inferno number 8.
Oh,
Yeah, and then there was one called permanent marker that everybody was reselling also. I don't have that because I'm not interested in this. Everybody else have it, I don't want it. I want something that not that is not just everywhere in each shop,
I mean,
so
it's
so
nice to have some common things out there, and especially when they're nice, of course. But it is always nice to have something different too than everybody else, you know? I think
yeah.
it's awesome to have like if like you're doing with the Chem 91, you're giving it to everybody with their order, and everybody's got a good version of it. I think that's awesome, you know, to have a one design race. Like if you had a cup that was a Chem 91 cup, or let's just call it a one design cup, where you could enter in their grapefruit, you could enter a Chem 91, and they would just compete in their own categories. Like each type is its own category. And then it's like,
That's like
okay,
the
well,
Growers Cup,
yeah, so
like
you've got a
just
permanent marker, but who can do it the best, right?
yeah.
So you give the same cut to 20 growers, you get back 20 different buds, right? So
Yes.
it's fun to have that kind of one design factor as well. But you know, on the other hand, it's great to just keep coming out with new stuff. What's GPP
I don't know. That's Michael Wolf Siegel,
all about?
and I don't know if you've seen. Do you know who he is?
I remember him from Facebook. We'd had messages, and I kind of left Facebook probably like 4 years ago or something. I didn't delete it, but I just don't use it, so I just deleted the app and stuff. So like my
You don't
computer's
get
never been on it.
notifications.
My phone doesn't go on it.
We've podcasted with him before, and it's it's a good watch. I'll share a
Oh yeah.
link with you
I
guys. And
remember him seeming like an interesting cat for sure.
oh my
We had
god, for
some
sure.
chats, but we didn't really have a long chat or anything, to the best of my
If you didn't have a
memory.
long chat, it was probably not him. He's
Well,
just
no,
like
we had long
he's
written
long-winded.
chats, but not
Oh
talk.
yeah,
I don't think we had a call, but we had some long written chats. That's for sure. But yeah, super interesting guy.
yeah, he is. Um, alrighty. So we've talked about the certified dealers. Anything else that you want to talk about what you're doing today? Any up and coming breeding work you're doing?
Well, I'm on the fence about a couple that are supposed to be starting in Africa, but they've been pushing back, and like the time to start has been pushing back. So I've been getting a little bit frustrated with that. I thought we were good to go a while ago, but one in particular is in Ghana, and it's a huge, you know, we got a beautiful, I think it was 400-hectare field on the big river there. The Volta River is one of the largest freshwater sources in the world. So it was really to be a oil production center essentially for medical grade, like do EU GMP extraction. But of course, it's going to have a tropical breeding station there as part of the process. But I was first invited onto that project just over 3 years ago, and they kept me like, "We're gonna have the license next year," and then it was, "We're gonna have it next month," and then it was like, "Oh," and it's just been dragging out, and
I
so it's
think they
driven me
call
nuts.
I think they call that being on the bleeding edge,
Ah,
right?
painful. And then because I thought I had that one really in the bag, I wasn't too worried. When I got invited to start one through a friend that gave me a connection in Zimbabwe, and this guy brought the first CBD seeds to Zimbabwe from Colorado, and the whole industry there was still using the same shit that didn't was never acclimatized. So it was always moldy, and they have all these like, you know, really low grade greenhouses built out of wood and plastic and stuff, and they've got mold problems and they can't ship the weed out. And they got 10,000 farmers that bet their livelihoods on it, and they're still the only person making money in the whole country is the lady that makes the clones. But they haven't done a generation of breeding to stabilize them or acclimatize them. So they're just growing all this stuff that doesn't belong there, and everybody's crop keeps rotting. They're on like the eighth year of that. And so I told them, I said, listen, talk to the government. If they want me to set up a breeding station there and help you turn it around, I would love to do that. But but I said, unless they're going to stop locking people up for cannabis, I said, I don't want to. And I want not only that, I want them to let the people out that are locked up now. And I had these round robin discussions between him and ministers in the Zimbabwe government. They literally sat down to discuss, can we just stop persecuting people for cannabis? and let the people out. And they said, "Oh no, but we've got some really bad people in there that were murderers and stuff." I'm like, "Well, keep them for murder. I don't give a just don't keep them for weed, you know? It shouldn't be that hard to figure out." But I said, look at it from a buyer's point of view. If you're in the UK, do you want to buy from a regime that imprisons people for growing their own? Or do you want to support producers in a country where people are allowed to grow their own, you know? If I given the choice, I would rather take the product from the place that's nice to people than the place that's not nice to people, you know? So I said, look at it as a PR move if you have to. Like, it's the right thing to do. But I really did lean on them. But I never accept, they said, we'll fund a breeding station for you here, but we can't change the laws about that. And I said, well, if it's only legal for me, then it's no fun. You know, it's no fun if the homies can't have none, you know? So I just turned them down. And then I've been offered two other places to work in Morocco recently, and I'm giving them serious consideration. So hopefully, what I want to do in Morocco is make seeds in the off season, because I used to make seeds for Moroccan growers from Switzerland. I would come down with shish, it was all shishkaberry seed that I sent down there. I would go to this guy in Algeciras that had a shop, and we would sell kilos of shishkaberry seed to Moroccan farmers in like 2002. And in
It sounds like we missed
2003,
some stories somehow. Because all of a sudden we're like, oh, we got some, we sold kilos of seeds in Morocco. I think we need to take a couple of steps back and get a couple more of those stories.
we're gonna, hopefully, there's no point in making seeds there in the middle of their crop because there's so much pollen. Like there's so much pollen. But if you're doing a greenhouse on the coast where it's not too cool, then you can do winter crop in the off season where nobody's growing big fields because they got snow up in the mountains, you know? That's the season where they make the hash, but not when they grow it, you know? So in the off season, you can be pretty damn sure the pollen you're using in that greenhouse, whether you're filtered or not, is your pollen, right? If you try that in July or August, forget it. You know, it's just so much pollen. I remember reading some stat that in Barcelona in August or September that they said 80% of the pollen count was Moroccan, you know,
Oh, wow.
of any type of pollen. Like, it doesn't matter if it's from trees or whatever, but they said the pollen in Barcelona, when they measured it, it was 80% of it was Moroccan cannabis pollen. So
And
you
that's,
think that,
I mean, wow, that's amazing.
so, and that's probably not at a super high density because I'm sure you could get away with a seedless plant on your balcony. You have to be pretty unlucky for that pollen to hit it. But if a random pollen hit it, that's probably what it was. You know, it's crazy. So in Morocco, there's a big market for feminized hash seeds. You know, they have to be ones that produce very well in the hash. And now they're getting hip to, the terp yields and stuff too. So they really want better and better seeds, and the Moroccans, that market has grown since I served it, and there's a lot of downstream shishkaberry there too. You see that Nicole Kush from Marambaros, that was a shishkaberry hybrid which is widely cultivated down there now, and that was a cross, I think, of you have blueberry, MK Ultra, shishkaberry, and blue satellite, if memory serves, and so it's very reminiscent of shishkaberry, that's for sure. But yeah, there's a great market there, and those are for million seed lots, like the commercial farmers, they buy million seed lots, and they were doing them basically 25 euro cents a seed for a long time, but even that's dropping. I'm hearing like 8 cents a seed and stuff now too for feminized seed. And these are, modern hybrids, but just in bulk. So you think the price goes through the floor. But at that point, it's like, well, why not just produce them in Morocco, in the off season? As long as you're somewhere with the right temperatures that you don't have to heat or cool the greenhouse. It's very efficient to grow in a greenhouse if you don't have to heat or cool it. Once you have to heat or cool it, it starts to get expensive, you know. even dehumidifiers, something, but if you can avoid a lot of electrical consumption and a lot of hardware installation and that. But anyway, I think I jumped past a question you'd popped up there about how does the new law affect us in the States? And remains to be seen, right? There's a lot of chatter I've noticed about people saying they'll probably leave the seed business alone, but there's no guarantee of that. That looks to me like, they could, obviously, after the 1 year grace period, they could totally shut down seeds and clones by the letter of the law. Whether they do or not, that's what remains to be seen. And I don't think that the majority of clone guys and seed guys in the States are gonna turn tail, right? They're gonna, if people start getting busted and losing all their shit, then people will start stepping down. But until
Right.
that happens, and I don't want to jinx it and make it happen, but good Lord, they have the tools in the law to shut everyone down that's doing clones or seeds. That's just the letter of the law, right? So if they have to prove that what you're selling will grow into something that's not hemp. You have to, if your plant produces more than the point 0.3, then you're on the hook. But the onus is on the state, each state, to grow out your seed or cutting and see what it comes out as, right? Whether they do that or not is a totally other story. I always feel like with the seed business that law enforcement is stretched very thin everywhere typically, and it's got to be at the lowest priority. It has to be fucking pot seed. It's not like you can get high off a pot seed, and you pretty much have to be a responsible adult for about 4 months to turn it into something that you'd want to consume anyway, right? So I think it's got to be like, considering there must be a few people that are reasonable on that side of the blue line, they must have to prioritize to some degree and say, but when I see the stupid things on the news that they're doing down there, like I can't make heads or tails of what's reasonable in the mind of an American bureaucrat. It's not, it's my head doesn't fit in their head. I can't figure it out. What motivates these people to do some of the things that they do anyway? So I don't,
Self-destructive.
I mean, I can't say. Nobody knows how they're going to treat us. They have the legal tools to make our lives miserable if they want to, but they also have to choose to do so, and they
Like I
have to
said,
choose
I,
that
I think
above.
it's going to be difficult for them to come after seed producers or people that sell clones because they, like you said, they'd have to grow the plants out, and
They have to grow them out
that's
to
just
charge
too
it.
expensive for something that's just not. It's
Yeah,
not.
it's
What they really want to get rid of is the
the
gas
gas
stations,
station stuff. I
right?
know.
And honestly, I kind of agree with that.
Well,
Like I mean, like I just think that it's unfortunate that they
the
go from one
easiest,
extreme to another.
the easiest way to get rid of shitty cannabis is to allow real cannabis. You know, when I say shitty cannabis, I mean not even real cannabis. It's
Right.
cannabinoid-like synthetics or whatever it is. It's it's a fuck up. It's a all that nasty shit that they're selling, all those synthetics. That is a direct result of them not allowing the sale of real cannabis. What the people want is real cannabis or real extracts of cannabis. They don't want THCP and all this other shit. Like you can have naturally occurring THCP. They're still finding cannabinoids all the time, but they haven't, you know, we haven't seen the last new cannabinoid, I'm sure. Because some of them, the reason they have a hard time finding them is they often have similar boiling points to other ones, or pretty much the same boiling points as other ones. So they're hiding behind those when they're testing. But pathways are being discovered all the time. I'm not at the bleeding edge of the tech in it, but I really hope they don't crack down on everybody because of course I love to see it, homegrown's where it's at. But yeah, all you have to do is just let the real stuff be, and that shit goes away overnight. There's no need for turning hemp into weird things. You don't need to do it anymore. Just leave the fucking shit alone. And like echinacea tickles the same receptors, you know? There's other cannabinoid bearing plants, they're not gonna, it's just the oddest thing really, how much effort and evil has been poured into prohibition. Like it's crazy. It really is ludicrous. It's a freaking plant that we should all have the ability to grow. It's our natural right to. It's our natural born right as an earthling. It is another natural earthling species, and nobody has the right to make another species extinct. So that's really one of the motivating things when I got started was not only, we have to save our own seed, but we have to get it out there and get people growing it to not only conserve it, but improve it and make it more ubiquitous. Because I always thought it again comes down to a critical mass of civil disobedience. Exactly. You gotta override the bullshit. Just when the people lead, the leaders follow. And that's what happens when they just throw up their hands and go, fuck, we can't police this. We're failing. We can't even keep up a charade of policing this anymore. People just ignore us. So then they have to accept it and then they try to regulate it. I saw some talking head talking about this the other day where they said, we need to regulate the cannabis market and then let it be a free market. It's like, do you not know what a free market is? It is the antithesis of a regulated market. And I believe in a free market over a regulated market because a regulated market, they're picking favorites. There's barriers to entry. It'll get sold to the highest bidder like the politicians do with every other industry. So that's where you end up with a nightmare. Whereas, yeah, it's just got to be I got no problem with businesses selling cannabis, any business. If you want to, Marlboro wants to sell hash spliffs, I don't care. I hope they do. I wouldn't stop anybody from it. I would just let them fucking compete and people will decide what is good and what sucks. Yeah, damn straight. That there is vested interest fighting against cannabis, and that's always the way. And the politicians, as long as they can be bought and sold, which will always be as long as they exist, there will be politicians that can be bought and sold. And it goes beyond, you know, what is fair and what isn't. It's just like it's none of your business what herbs are in my garden. It's none of if you think that's your business, you've got too much time on your hands.
Yeah.
We're the busybodies, man. They want to regulate everything. And really if they just got out of the way, we would regulate it. The market would be self-regulating. I've always believed that. And I see lots of people like to say, no, no, we need the regulations or the corporations would destroy. Well, if there wasn't governments, there wouldn't be corporations. They're a legal fiction. Corporations are a legal fiction of the government. I'm an anarchist because I've come to the realization that I cannot trust people to govern us. And cannabis is just like the litmus test of that. Like, how many countries prohibit it, and where is it reasonable? It's not reasonable to prohibit cannabis, and still it's like the norm amongst countries. I mean, there's a fundamental problem here. Is they're corruptible, and it's not that some governments are corruptible. They're all corruptible to varying degrees. Some of them are more subtle about it than others, but across the board, you can't say, oh, but in Denmark they're not corrupt or any. There's nowhere you can say that they're not. Everywhere they've done something. That's fun. That's fun. But
That's true, yeah.
I
Absolutely true.
mean, I think we could have voluntary association. People are like, what do you want to see instead? And I always think voluntary associations, like even for, healthcare, such an ordeal that people talk about. And you think, one of the charities I support is Doctors Without Borders or MSF, Medicine Sans Frontières. And you think, why couldn't that just be how all medicine was? Like, if you want it to be a charity and let them do it wide open, why tie your taxes why have the taxes? If the taxes, they can spend it on military shit or blowing up coke boats or whatever, but you can't get your tonsils out for free. In Canada, we have universal healthcare, but it's not universal and national, but also it's not ideal either. So it's not that it's perfect, but it's better than some situations. But it's not, everywhere's got room for improvement. Switzerland was pretty good because they had a national system and a private system, and I could get an MRI the same day if I needed it, and I did. One time I need to get an MRI. They said, well, you can wait for a government appointment at the hospital, or you can go to this private clinic, pay $800 and get it this afternoon. Fucking, I'm there. But overall, I think voluntary associations can achieve anything that the governments are expected to do. So I think you just can't trust the bureaucrats to do it because they're remarkably inefficient in the best case scenario. In the worst case scenario, they're just fucking corrupt and stealing the money anyway. So if they're going to send all that money overseas, they don't need my money. They got too much already. Like really, you got to cut them off at some point. They're like the fucking crackhead kid that keeps coming back and stealing your shit. You got to change the laws. Say out,
You
you
gotta move out.
fucking, you know, we're
Ah,
done. We're done, like, come on. So I really, haven't been a fan of government for a long time, but it's only gone downhill my whole life. So I mean, I gave up on them a long, long time ago. I expect nothing beneficial from them, really, because it's just overall problems. You don't have all the wars. You don't have the nuclear bombs. You don't get, I mean, there's always going to be problems. You're never going to have a world free of problems. But to me, it's not the utopia to have the wide open Wild West. The utopians are the ones trying to say government can make this all neat and tidy. We'll just educate your children for you, and we'll take care of this and that and the other, but we're also going to do this you don't like. We're also going to do that you don't like. Why not just have it a la carte? You say, well, I want to have universal health care, therefore I pledge 5% of my earnings to belong to the Blue Card Club. And the Blue Card Club is accepted as health insurance at this hospital, and I can use my Blue Card coin to spend here or to earn here. Why not let each of the parties issue their own fucking currency? Let them all issue their own services. Why should the red people have to listen to the blue people and vice versa? There's enough of both of them. They could both have their own coins. They could both have their own insurance policies or lack thereof or whatever. Like let them, show them where to run, but they can be supranational. They don't have to be national. It's like, the Rotary Club, you can go to the Rotary Club in different countries. It's still the Rotary Club. It's not based on the country so much. It's an association. It's a voluntary association. It does nice things. It's not run by the government. There's NGOs, non-government organizations, right? That is the future, I think, for our species because nationalism sets us against each other all the time, and it's the cause of so many wars. And half the time it's rolled into religion as well, which makes it even worse. Because then the people can totally justify any atrocity because now it's my religion that's making atrocities. Well, come on, I don't believe any of that shit. You know, I'm definitely in the spiritual, not religious thing. But if I say religion, like freedom of religion, what do I do religiously? I smoke weed religiously. You look at the definition of it, something you do all the time, something you do every day. And say, I smoke weed religiously. That's a fair statement, right? In the English language, I smoke weed religiously. You smoke weed religiously. So is it religious oppression to have our sacrament taxed? I feel it is, you know? So I can't bring myself. I don't shop at a Canadian dispensary. I don't go buy dope. I'm a grow your own guy, but if I did even, I would be offended to pay tax on it because that's my sacrament by virtue of the fact that I use it religiously. You know? So I think I'd love to see more people try standing on that. I know it was tried in Canada a long time ago. There were some really cool activists in Ontario, your Church of the Universe, if I recall. And here's these two brothers, something I can't remember their names. I did meet them before in Amsterdam at a couple of times. But yeah, they fought it on religious grounds long before there was legal hemp or legal medical in Canada. But they didn't prevail. But the first time doesn't work, you can try again. But really, I think we have to stand on it's religious because we all do this religiously. There, there, we can all put our heads up now. There you go.
My lady was like, "You're smoking out the house. You got to open up the window." And I was like, "Damn, it's cold in this little room with the window open. It's a cold, rainy
Now, can
day."
I have another dab now, or will that
Oh
get your
yeah, no,
channel?
for sure.
That'll get your
Ever make
channel
it?
canceled or something?
Oh no, 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 no.
That's my problem. I never know how to behave on social media.
Oh
They're always
no,
giving me shit and kicking me out.
no. We go hard here. So
Oh my God, what a
ni-
great guy.
yeah, it's nice to see you, Sasha. We got to make Sasha more a more regular guest host. It's been a minute. And Not So Dog is, I don't want to say he's flaky, but because he never promised he'd make it, but he said he was gonna try, and he's like, I'm almost home, and I was like, all right, that was an hour and a half ago. So I got my backup guest host in the Slovenian Hobbit. So
I don't talk much, but I like to listen. Sometimes it's better to just listen to the man that is the guest, and this approach I think is a big quality of our podcast also, that we don't interrupt people when they have a good story to tell.
I should
So
ask you,
I
is that too
always like
loud?
to
no, you're good. No,
no. So it's great. I mean, Steve, you have such a vast experience, and you are so down to earth guy. This is beautiful to see. It's very much respect to you, man. Um, and you know all the guys from the scene. You mentioned Shanti Baba. I will try to to hit him up. I think to invite him to our next maybe show or future shows. Do you have you ever worked with him, or
No,
are
no, we
you
never worked
connected to
together.
him?
I don't. We got together a couple times only. Like we don't know each other super well. But I did sell him my facility in Switzerland when I left, and but yeah, he's a nice guy and a good worker. He knows what he's doing. I always enjoyed the couple times we hung out. I enjoyed hanging out with him, but we haven't stayed in touch with him. I haven't talked to the dude in 20 years, more around 20 years.
Because it seems to me like you have, as a breeder, you have these ethics. You are these guys, who have a own system of how to create genetics. How to make a real line. How to look for specific traits and then to combine them into a one plant. Which is going to be, that is a you're that is art, a form of art, but it's also very logic and mathematic, and you have to know plants, so reading plants I think is the key, right?
You gotta love doing it to anything to do really well at it, I think, if you have, there's hard to say, but overall, I think the passion is really an upside to it. You can have a lot of school knowledge about it, and I ran into this where in Colombia I hired three PhDs for my breeding team. One had a PhD in seed production, one had a PhD in selective breeding, and one had a PhD in molecular genetics. So you know, I can learn something from each of them, but all of them are clueless about cannabis. So it's what, have been, we'll get you another. You have to get some more. That sour cherry he's talking about, man, I've seen some super sexy results from the testers and customers that have had that one. That was one of our releases out of Thailand, and
I
Yeah,
just thought of a saying. I want to make sure I get it out. Every customer is a tester. Now,
yeah, that's
does
true.
that sound
That's true.
bad?
No,
Like
no, that's
you
true.
having them
Well,
do,
in a way, yeah. If you're sending your customers,
no,
stuff
but the
that
point
just
is
your
that
testers should check.
but the I mean, it's not saying that you haven't tested anything, but it's the point of is that you want that information to be continued
Mhm.
to spread, right?
Exactly.
Like,
You want
and
them to
the
contribute to the
testing
knowledge.
never actually ends, right? Because
Right.
maybe we can continue to do better. You know, maybe
You know,
that's
it's
something. Maybe that's something that people would be willing to add as well.
yeah.
Is um, is that cultivation information, the data?
Yeah,
You
we put
know,
that
like,
on our retail websites for Cementus and Stars and Stripes seed. We
mhm.
did put a review system up there with forms and everything, so they can give us as much in-depth data as they want. If they want to play along and contribute to that open source knowledge base of everything that runs through there, or anything else they grow, because it's nice. Lots of us geeks like that, the ganja geeks, that we'll have fun with it.
Yeah, I love it. And we will share links to that in the comments later on. And then, or actually, people have to just message us to get the passwords to get
Anybody
in, right?
can go there and read, but if you
Okay.
want to post, you got to get the invite code. And
And
all
what's
your
the link?
followers are welcome to have an invite code. It's just to stop all the spammers and everything. If
Right.
you put it out
A
there, it
couple of my
just becomes a
followers might be
shithole.
spammers. You never know. You gotta
Yeah,
like,
but you know what? But if anybody that misbehaves gets that will lose their account, so they won't be there for long. We
and
haven't
what's the
had to
website
cancel
again?
anybody's account. We've had it like 2 years. There's two different places to enter. One is the European seed site portal is cementusseeds.com. And then in the US, we have starsandstripesseed.com. But we're moving it off of those pages and giving it its own page where it's called Ganja Stand. So I don't, depending on when people watch this, it might be a Ganja Stand. You know? But today you get there either through Cementus seeds or Stars and Stripes seeds.
Nice.
I'm
Wh-
going to add you to the newsletter, Gabby. Once you've received the cuts from my guys and have them propagated and ready to go out, I'll add you to the newsletter from breedersteve.com. And then I try and, I don't do it very often, sometimes once a year, sometimes once every 2 or 3 years. And I'm trying to at least do it like quarterly. And there has to be some news. So if I have some new propagators on the verified clone thing, I'll send out the new newsletter. Yes, but not many. If you're in the US, there's some Seeds of Anarchy ones at Stars and Stripes Seed, and there's a different lineup in Europe at Cementus. Yeah,
It is in Germany, Cementus.
Cementus is based in Holland, but we don't sell in Holland. Right now, we have distributor in Germany who does
mhm.
our handles the retail end of things, and they also have their own site called Wunderbohnen, Wunderbohnen.de,
Yeah,
and
it's
Wunderbohnen,
wonder beans.
yeah, they've got them too. So for Spice of Life, I have in Europe, I have a shishka berry based adventure mix, shishka berry based one, and a sweet pink grapefruit based one. So everything in it's supposed to be downstream from those, and really interesting mix of plants in there. Pretty much lots of today's top stuff crossed with some of the oldies like that. So those are going really, really well. And then there's another lineup of Seeds of Anarchy from the Colombian project that was imported legally to Holland and available in the EU. So we're trying to do it with all the paperwork, like phytosanitary certs and everything, so that it's all above board. And we're about to do the first shipment to Holland out of Thailand. So those sour cherry and those ones that have only been available in the States. They'll be available in Europe soon too. We're probably not going to restock the States. I think the site in the States, we're going to convert that just to like a database site where there can be free listings for all seed banks and also the reporting so people can still report the data on everything they grow. So we just want to kind of make that a grow database site now. And we'll move the seeds off it by the end of the year when the new law kicks in, because there's three partners and the other two don't want to continue they don't want to risk seeds after that 1 year's up. But we're just gonna, they're my partners on the EU site as well, so they're gonna just focus on Cementis full time. So the EU's, the US is the biggest market and the EU is the second biggest, but the EU is growing the fastest. So there's more people that need seeds. It was interesting. I was reading some good seed market data yesterday. You just Google cannabis seed market data and you'll see different reports from different reviews. And there was one comparing US, Canada, and EU, and there's some insight, which isn't hard to understand, but in Canada, seed sales are very weak because it's federally legal. You can go and buy dabs or pens or pre-rolls in any province, in any city. Cannabis is widely available and pretty inexpensive. It's mostly taxed, but it's still expensive to me. I wouldn't want to be paying retail for my dabs. I like to save a bunch, but the average person, they're not going to get into growing their own because they have wide access already. Whereas in places where they don't have wide access, like France or Spain. Spain's pretty good. They got some clubs there and stuff, right? France, they don't. But they grow their own because they still smoke dope. But they don't want to buy garbage, fucking repressed hash on the streets from sketchy dudes. They want to have kind bud to smoke. The only way you can be sure of that is growing your own in prohibition days. And that's how, we all got started, most of us, right? So in the places where people can't buy weed easily, seed sales are much better than because the grow your own crowd, once you can just buy your own, 90% of them will just buy their own, you know, and 10% of them, I'm just pulling these numbers out of my ass, but it's a
Well,
small
no,
percentage of us.
it's probably even worse than that,
Yeah,
which is
yeah, yeah. It
it's
might be
unfortunate.
1% of us grow
Yeah,
our own.
it's unfortunate for the grow your own movement that
No, it's not. It's fine. People love convenience, and I did talk to some friends about this last summer. I was hooking up with an old friend I hadn't seen in 20 years since I took her to a dead show, her first dead show. She's been to so many now, but I said, let me help you set up a few plants here. You gotta grow your own because I see all this dispo weed there, and I'd be like, come on, you gotta grow your 4 plants. Just do it. Just even if it doesn't work out, you got to look at them all summer. Let's put out 4 plants in your yard. You got a sunny spot here. Oh, but then I'd have to take it down, and it's true, trimming's a lot of work, you know. And if you just hash it like I do mostly, then I still trim a little bit, but I only keep like 1 or 2 ounces from the things I grow that are promising, and then the rest of the plant all hash. So I really prefer making hash more than trimming. Even if I like smoking weed, I fucking hate trimming weed. Yeah, I almost got killed by my trim immigrants one time because I walked into the place in Switzerland and they'd been trimming for months on end at that point. 'Cause it was like light depth going or yeah, depth's going all summer, and it was in the end of the summer, you're just seeing the morale was dead. And this was one of those moments where I just couldn't help be an asshole. Sometimes you just can't help it. And I walk in and I was like, oh, sure. I was like, you know how many fucking pounds I've trimmed? And they're like, how many? I'm like, fucking none, man. I'm not a trimmer. I literally had to fucking, they were gonna kill me. To get 40 people with scissors after you. You make short work of me for sure. Fuck it.
that's
But yeah, I
funny.
never trimmed a pound. I never trimmed a pound of weed to sell. It's just crazy. 'Cause I grew lots, but I would just get people to trim at that point because you can't trim at all if you start growing a bunch. And I find it, I just I enjoy like doing an ounce or two, and that's it. And I can, if I feel I can do an ounce or two watching a movie or something, make it look pretty, put it in a jar, I'm good. Yeah, I don't have any regular lines right now. I will bring some out though, I promise. But I did start back with two different fem lines from, or fem projects, one in Thailand, one from Colombia. Those, the the ones from Colombia, there seem to be very low incidence of herms, but the ones out of the Thai project, there's more herms in those. So I wasn't super proud of them as seeds, but as long as you're warned and you're just hunting for the right mom, they are delish. There's some absolute stunning plants, and most people haven't seen them yet. Very few people have had an ego punch or a sour cherry or a gargoyle or polar vortex or the sunshine or the sunflower. But I came out with some new lines there from Thailand, and when I see the results from some people, there's a social club in Malta growing all of that's like all they're growing pretty much is from that new lineup from Thailand that was new in 2024. And they send me back pictures of some that I'm just like, oh, that's not even done, and it's absolutely thick with resin. And there's just some really sexy ones. So I'm and another grower in Germany, he got testers from Stars and Stripes of the sour cherry a couple of years or a year ago or whatever, but he did just a fantastic job with it. He used it to cross with some other things, but he not only grew it exceptionally well, but he photographed it exceptionally well. So they were crisp, clear photos. The Malta guys, unfortunately, they're sending us like videos of the plant going, oh, the plants look really good, but if you try and get a grab from it, they're all blurry and shit. So I'm like, send me some crisp shots of those. They look so good. I want to put them on the catalog because I'm trying to do the catalog all with client photos, tester customer photos. And I was going to mention something about tester programs. Is most tester programs I find they're really strictly a promotional tool, and that's fine, you know. But in some cases, I want to have testers check stuff out before we decide it's worth releasing or not. So
Of
say
course.
that's the hardcore testers. Then you're testing shit that we haven't signed off on yet, and
No,
maybe we're
I
trying.
wasn't. I wasn't suggesting that stuff doesn't need to get tested. What I was
Oh no, it
suggesting is
does.
that the testing never ends, and that
Sure. No, no,
and
and
that the
I agree
learning,
100%. No,
I
you'll
mean,
always want the feedback. You always want that feedback.
yes,
When I honestly think that when it was the summer of 2000 when I planted my first field, and that was in Switzerland, and it was 2,400 square meters. We had about 2,000 plants in it, and I had started really high numbers of seeds and then thinned them out before taking out, the best 100 from 10,000 kind of thing to get the plants we had out there. But when we did that, I advertised on Cannabis World and Overgrow and invited people publicly and said, we're having an open house at the breeding station this summer for the month of August. I don't think any seed company ever had an open house for people. Like Sensi Seeds would have a cannabis castle party kind of by invite for thing, but wasn't like a public invite. I was putting out public invites for people to visit and see a legal cannabis breeding operation. First it was a few people, and then they would post it, and people were like, "What? You can just go there?" And so then I had to rent a van to take the people around because there were so many people wanted to come and see it. So then I continued it for a couple summers and said, each August is open house. Anybody's welcome to come. And there's always lots to see in August. So it was really wild. And the year with the field, particularly, a bunch of the people came out and it would be like we'd have to be de-leafing in the field or something, thinning out all the old fans and shit. And you'd suddenly show up with 10 people in a van that are just stoked to go out there and rip them out. It was so you got a lot of Huck Finn help that way. It was fun. Good times. I think we had the first tester program too. I didn't know when we started the tester program, I don't think any other seed companies were doing tester programs yet. There wasn't very many seed companies when I started.
Something else I was thinking about that you said before, and like with these authentications that we're giving people, I mean, I think it's great, and I'm gonna do it myself, right? Because I think it's good for people to be able to say, "Hey, look, I got this clone from somebody," right?
Yeah, you got some
But
traceability.
right, and that and that it's legit. But that only goes so far, right? Like that person giving it to the next person, giving it to the next person, giving it to the next person. If they say, "Oh, look," I mean, it has some validity, right? You know that at some point that the clone was right, but anywhere along that chain, something could have happened,
Right.
right?
You
So,
can
you know,
find the
getting it
break.
as getting it as close to the source has value, So, you know, that's just something that I wanted to say that I was thinking about that. I
No,
think it's
for sure. And I know
you know,
some people said, "Oh, well, does this come with sequencing and stuff?" And I was like, even if it did, which it doesn't at this point, but even if it did, you're not going to sequence it to check. You know what I mean? Like the average grower isn't
it's
going
expensive.
to have it all sequenced to double check that they got the same thing that it says on the certificate, so it's
You know,
almost pointless that way. It's still good to do it, don't get me wrong, but it's
I
not, it
mean,
doesn't really prove anything if everybody can't do it, right?
yeah, well, I don't know. I don't 100% agree. So first of all, I was promoting that people get things sequenced. And I wanted to do a big sequencing because I have like 5 or 6 sour diesels. I want to see how many of them are the same, right? And same thing with Chem 91. But it's so expensive, right, that it would cost $10,000 for me to properly sequence five five clones. And unfortunately, in my current situation, I can't do that. I'm hoping that maybe someday we can get one of these companies to sponsor the testing so that because they would get a lot of positive promotion and
Of course,
but
I
but
just
to
mean
give you an
from the
example.
client's perspective, like your customers, they're not, well, even if you get it
Well,
sequenced,
no,
they're
but
not all going to get it sequenced to
I'll get
compare.
to that in a minute. Okay, I think if I could afford to do it, I'm going to strongly consider getting anything sequenced before I sell it as a clone only, right? If I have a clone only keeper, like if it costs a couple of $1,000s to sequence it, I think it's worth it.
Yeah,
Down
absolutely.
down the line, so the reason why you said the average person isn't going to pay for the sequencing, not today, not
Yeah,
today.
down the line, I mean, it'll be
Right?
more and more affordable.
Like the fact that it costs $2,000 now, it could have been thousands of dollars, ten
Right.
thousand dollars
Oh
years
yeah,
ago,
no,
right?
it was
The,
prohibitively expensive like
right.
20
So
years ago,
the
and now it's,
cost of this is going down,
yeah,
and in the future, it may not be like a small home grower that's going to do the testing, but maybe maybe somebody would be willing to say, hey, you know what? If that thing tests, you know, as a genetic identical to the original um, sour diesel or whatever, then I'm willing to pay the money for it, right? So like, if you could prove that something,
mm,
what you know was what, for instance, the sweet pink grapefruit, okay, 10 years from now, somebody's like, and like you said before with the shishka
it's
berry,
sequenced already. Honestly, I
yeah.
haven't done it, but I haven't grown it myself in a few years. But like I think 6 years ago was maybe the last time I grew it. But I would love to put one out again this summer. I hope somebody gives me one. I've just been every summer. I've just been beggars can't be choosers because I've been pretty lazy about keeping a light. I haven't kept a light in a long time. And I like to travel a fair bit in the winter, so I just don't bother with indoor anymore. And I make enough hash from my backyard for the time I am home. And I think I just rely on what the universe brings in the form of friends, that what they kick me down to grow is what I try out. Plus, I don't want to, even as much as I love certain ones, I don't want to just grow those, and we're very limited in what we're only legally allowed for. But as long as you're under 12, you're probably okay. You can get a fine up to 12 and then supposedly 6 months after that. So I was like, well, I'll just grow, 11 or whatever. I'll risk a fine, but I don't want to get 6 months. I don't have time for that. So it's been fun to see what I get. Some years it's the same thing, and some years it's some new ones. There's always some new ones every year. So this year, some of the new ones I got to try, there was a Triangle Kush with Gelato 45 cross, which wasn't, it smelled nice, but I don't think it was all that. Like, it just maybe wasn't the best example of the cross, because I think the cross could have been really nice, but I wasn't stoked on the bud. It was okay. And then there was two other ones I'd never heard of, Frosted Fruitcake and Vanilla One Sunrise. And I think Frosted Fruitcake is from a Canadian breeder, Sacred Cuts, I think. And the Vanilla One Sunrise, I know absolutely nothing about. It's very narrow leaf and kind of smells Asian a bit. I don't really interesting, fun to smell it, but it's not going to be great. Shake says it'll be like the pearls, except outdoor at 50 degrees north, where it's even worse. It's
I just thought of something. Um, and I forget what it's called because with the people in their plants project, there was another project where they were taking leaf samples, okay, to do DNA, but like in the future, like they preserve it. You can't grow a plant from it, but they could take a leaf disc sample and then preserve it to a point to where years later you can do DNA sequencing on it, right? So you don't even have to pay the money to do the sequencing now if you
gonna
take the samples
take
and
proper
and,
samples.
and get them properly stored,
Yeah, yeah.
so I think that's something that is way more accessible to everybody. Like, hey, you want to
Clean them
release a
with
strain?
alcohol typically.
What'd you say?
You clean them with alcohol typically, and most of what they want to sample, if you're sending them to the lab, is the petioles. Right? I've seen some little like shaker test with leaf punches, but if you're
Hmm.
sending stuff to the lab, you're gonna send them a petiole, right? Which is like the leaf stem. That's
Yeah,
what
I
they
mean,
say
they were
that's
telling
what they
me
test.
that they wanted like a full leaf because I think they were gonna not only try to preserve, like maybe they would take a sample from that, but also they wanted to be able to document the way it appeared, so that it was like, look,
That's
here's
what
the
they want.
leaf,
For this,
here's the
for the
leaf, here's what it looked like, and then
Yeah, that's
here's
a
the
different
DNA.
story. Yeah,
Yeah.
you wanted, that's a different story. But the sequencing, you only need to send in alcohol cleaned petioles.
But this is not, again, not for sequencing. It's for storing something that can be sequenced in the future,
Well, that's
right?
what you can store. If you've got dry petioles,
Keep it
you
in
can put
alcohol,
those into
though.
little tubes. What's that?
You would keep it in alcohol.
No, you just spritz them with alcohol and let it dry
Mm,
off, like to kill any bacteria. Plus they don't want any THC on it if there's resin stuck to it or anything. So they're like, clean the petioles with alcohol and then you put them into little tubes and send them off. Well, they have to be dry. You can't put it wet into the tube, obviously, but you send them dry leaf stems. So all you need to preserve is the stems of the leaves. You can take pictures of it and keep it on file, but with your coded sample to have sequenced, you only need the petiole.
yeah. So I believe it's a good idea to somehow try to preserve the material for DNA testing when it's a little bit cheaper. And then the other thing I'm a big believer in is putting everything into tissue culture from the very beginning. And so, like, I'm starting a bunch of seeds right now. I'm not gonna do these are fresh seeds, so I'm not gonna do them like start them in tissue culture, embryo rescue style. I'm just gonna start them in media as normal. But once they get big enough, I'm gonna take the top samples and put those all in tissue culture, and that way they're gonna be preserved. And you know, after we figure out which ones are the best, after repeated, growing of them, then we can figure out which ones we need to get rid of and which ones we can store. And it's so easy to store. So remember before you were talking about how you when you do breeding projects, you don't want to do hundreds, you want to do thousands, right?
Yeah,
But you have to keep copies of those thousands as well. And
all of them. At least not the way I do it.
yeah,
I don't even worry about
because
saving
you're not
backups.
'cause you're not doing clones, you're just making seeds.
Well, I do make clone backups, so I'm not knocking tissue culture any stretch of the imagination. I'm just saying when you say about my processes, I would start 10,000 seeds per line ideally. That's what I try and start. And sometimes I don't have a 10,000 seeds of it, so I don't. But if I have 10,000 seeds, I will plant 10,000 seeds per line. And then each 2 weeks, I kill 3/4 of them at the transplant. So once they're this big, they've already been culled a few times and you're only taking out like 100 plants knee
Mhm.
high to finish. Those ones I'll keep the backups of.
That's
Plus,
what I'm talking
then
about. So those are
then
the
I
ones that
know
are
if they're
tissue
male or
culture.
female just from the pre-flowers by then too, right? So I don't need to keep as many males probably, but I might want to check all these females because they're the best 100 from 10,000. But then I'll still just pick the best two or three from that probably. So a lot of those backups get killed, but I do end up keeping tons of backups from those 100 of each line while I'm checking them out to see who's nice.
And that's where tissue culture can help you out, right? When you're
Uh,
storing all those hundreds of plants.
Yeah, that saves you tons of space and effort, tons of infrastructure.
And
So
risk
with
of
next
loss.
gen, you'd put up a question there.
I can put it up
Um,
again.
I'd given them cuts before they were a seed company. Let's just leave it at that. Yeah. Um, anyway, that's another thing. But uh, saving your all your backups in tissue culture is way, way more efficient than having them all in a greenhouse. And they're less susceptible to like catching a virus from pests or something like that, because you can have white flies or thrips that are taking your virus from plant to plant. And so once they're in vitro, they're safe, right? So
Yeah.
I've seen some people though they just were doing them to calyx culture, but they found out that they were unable to restore all of them that way. It's different than meristem or nodal
Right.
culture, right? But the
So in
calyx,
talking with Jesse, he was
yeah,
saying that that's like a last resort type thing.
yeah,
That
but
it's
there's a lot to be gained from getting good at it, and every plant is probably
the
different,
callus culture I was talking
the
about.
calyx culture, yeah, the callus culture, because you have that's where you have the opportunity to mass produce tissue culture. You don't as meristem, because meristem you still got to have the plants. Whereas once you move to cellular culture, like calyx culture, now you can just put the calyx in a blender, knock it apart to millions of cells, and regrow them. So you
Hmm.
can mass multiply once you've mastered that. And that's a noble goal, I think, because you'll be able to it's beyond cleaning them up. It's important to have everything clean that you're going to put into mass production later. But yeah, if you're able to do calyx culture at scale, you're gonna, you know, you're gonna meristem. It's always going to take a person and a razor blade for
Yeah.
every
Well,
single one.
actually,
Right?
that's not true. There are robots that are doing this shit now.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, they have
Yeah.
actual robots that are doing. I think what Jesse said, and I hope I'm not misquoting him, is that currently with the callus culture, there's too much of a risk of mutations. And
Mhm.
so It just
It'll be
hasn't been.
very interesting to see more done with it, because you're starting to see more people dabble with it. And the same with anther culture, you don't see many people taking haploids that way, but there's interesting things to be done. There's lots tissue culture. I've never done it hands-on. I've sat there and watched people do it, but I've never done it. So I've never had my own tissue culture lab. I've had a tissue culture lab I was partners in, but I didn't physically do it. So I'm not, um, I've been around it a long time, but I'm not an expert, because it's just, it's always been somebody else that did it.
Hey, um, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you if you had a story that you wanted to tell about your time on Dead Tour or seeing a Grateful Dead show or something like that, since you have your Grateful Dead mug and have made a couple of references before. It's been a conversation theme that's happened before. So, you have any funny stories you want to tell about
Well,
seeing the
yeah,
Grateful Dead?
and both from the same weekend, I think. I have a couple of crazy cannabis dead stories, as you might imagine, but one of them in particular was the Palace in Auburn Hills, and I don't know, maybe the last time they played there, but I had a white tracker, a convertible tracker, and me and three buddies were going down to catch one night. They were playing 2 nights. And I had made, it was midsummer, and I had just chopped down a Northern Lights male that it was sticky. I wouldn't say it was resinous, but it was sticky. And I thought, I'm going to try cooking this down. Like in the little book, Cooking with Cannabis from years ago, there was a recipe for doing that, where you take a third of the shake and you cook it in cooking oil for, simmer it for half an hour or whatever, squish it out, and it turns the cooking oil bright green. I do then a second third, becomes dark green. I do the last third and it becomes black like motor oil, right? So you take a cup of that, quarter cup of that oil and add it to your pan of brownies in the recipe. And man, oh man, we were like, it's a male, it's not going to be that strong. It was crippling strong, and we'd already knew it. We had already eaten them once before, so we knew that they were fucking knock dead strong. But we had a whole tray cut into 4 pieces, and we each had one piece. And I said, "We'll eat them when we get to the bridge, because you have to drive over the bridge from Sarnia to Port Huron." And so we're like, "We'll eat them when we get into the bridge traffic, because usually you sit in a lineup." I didn't go to state very often, so it was like, but I knew the times I'd been, there was like traffic on the bridge. But this time we get to the bridge, it's like highway speed. There's no traffic. So I mean, we have to keep going to the US border. I'm like, gotta eat those fucking brownies fast. And we just like scarfing them down as fast as we could, these brownies. And we get there, we probably got crumbs all over our shirts and shit. We get up to there. And I can still picture the old border guard with like the flat top haircut and big dude just came from Denny's or something. He was like, "Hey, so where are you going? We're going to a concert." I said, Auburn, Palace at Auburn Hills. And they're like, they, he says, okay. And they already had all these deadheads pulled over. I think they just didn't even have a parking space left. There was all these deadheads pulled over. And he was kind of like, just like, go. And there was, 4 boys, we were in tie-dye t-shirts, and you're driving along and it's like within half an hour, and like, oh my God, I am absolutely toasted. And my friends are like, I don't know how you're driving. I'm like, oh God. And we were just melting. They were just way too strong. It was silly. So I'm losing it. And I don't know where. I keep thinking we're just going to see a sign for Auburn Hills. And we got of where there'll be a sign somewhere. And there, of course, there wasn't. And we just keep going on the highway. And suddenly I'm seeing signs, 2 miles Canada border, 1 mile Kansas border or something. And I'm like, oh shit, we're in Detroit. We're going to be back at the border going to Windsor. We missed the turn wherever it was. And so I was like, fuck. So I turn off this last exit in Detroit, which is one of the worst parts of Detroit at the time, I think. I don't know now, that was a long time ago, but man, it was not a nice neighborhood and there was definitely burnt out cars and bullet holes and shit. And I find this little like gas station corner store thing and I like, oh no, I gotta get a map because we didn't have phones, we didn't have a map, we didn't know where the fuck we were going, absolutely tripping balls on this edible. And I go in and there's a Hispanic dude, and I remember and he didn't speak English, and it's like carta, carta, and he points to the corner, and they have a machine like a box, like a newspaper box, but for maps, and it's like for $2 or whatever. I was like, hey, and the thing is all jammed up with slugs, so you couldn't put the coins in. So I look out, and there's all these women across the street yelling at my buddies, going, "Hey, what was what you doing here?" And just chewing them out, and those guys looking like they wish they were dead, like swallow us up now. And there was like a lineup of people, just shouting at them, not menacingly, but shouting at them, so they were just freaked out. And I was looking at the map box and I just kick the thing in, just destroy it so I can one big kick, break the door on it, pull out the map I need. I walk up to the front and leave $2 on the counter and the guy just laughs. I go give him his car, gotta get back on the highway, give the map to my buddy. I'm like, see where the fuck we're going. We have to get there. And I remember getting there and just kissing the ground when I got to that show. And then we decided to stay over, but we didn't have a place, so we ended up just like sleeping off in the woods somewhere off a back road. The campgrounds were full and wouldn't let us in, and it was a freaky night. And then we decided, fuck it, let's not go back. Let's get shows for the next night. But then the weeds worn off, of course. And while I was waiting to go into that show, outside on the highway, I'd walked into the bush a little bit to take a leak, and this guy's smoking a bowl, and it smells really good. And I think that was the first chem I ever smoked, was at that Dead show.
Oh,
So
damn.
that, and so, because I didn't recognize the name when he told me later, but I was really high off the bowl walking back to my car. Plus, when you've had edibles, that next bowl is just like takes you right back almost. So I was like extra high. But I get back, my buddy's like, I was like, oh man, I fucking super high. I smoked a bowl with a dude. And they're like, oh, did you score some weed? I'm like, no, I didn't even ask if he was selling any. Just he just offered to share the bowl with me, and I hit the bowl, and then it was baked and walked on. And I was thinking about later, is there some funny name like Cam or Chem Dog or something? And I think that was the first time I ever tried that was on. Well, I've never grown it, either of them, but just I've seen process of them
Well,
or
we're
tried.
gonna fix that. Okay.
Yeah, it'd be fun to put one out by the pool because that's why I'm
Uh,
trying to get to know some of the classics. Like I've had out like I call them the modern classics to me, like Gorilla Glue or Peanut Butter Breath, and trying those out and going, oh, these are nice and they have character. They're distinctive. They're stuck around a while, and if it's just I just found out last week that I think I've never had Skittles. I thought I'd had some, but the guys that had shared it with me showed me some phenos, the one was a purple and one was more green. So then I realized, okay, so I thought it was bred from seed. And this was even going back probably 6 or 7 years ago when somebody shared it with me. Because first he didn't tell me what it was. And I was going, is this sweet tooth? I'm smoking it. He had to roll joints. And he says, here, try this. Tell me what you think of it is. Before he said anything about names or anything. I was just like, oh, from tastes like sweet tooth. What is it? He's like, oh, it's Skittles, but I think it's half grapefruit and probably blueberry in there somewhere. I was like, oh. And then later I found out somebody said, no, it was Archive, I think, said, oh no, dude, that's a clone only. So if you had different phenos that tasted like sweet teas, it was from seed of somebody says yes, lots of people were selling seed of Skittles, right? So
well, it's
what I
just like
tried maybe
the sh-
wasn't even
it's just like the
the
shishka berry
yeah.
or
So I mean I
gorilla.
just laughed
It's like
about it
if
because
something's
for
good,
for many
people would
years
call it Skittles, or
yeah, but for so many years, I just assumed that's what it was because the one I had, that's what it was. But
get
then I
getting
find
back
out
to
that that
why
wasn't the real
DNA
thing.
sequencing, right?
What's that?
That's why the DNA sequencing is so
Oh yeah,
valuable.
yeah.
Because not for now. For now, it doesn't matter as much. 20, 30 years from now, when
Well,
we're
there's
trying to
lots of
prove
people
that this is
doing it
the real
now,
one, yeah,
and even
it's
the company I
expensive.
set up in Colombia, they didn't want me to talk about anything because um, it's not all mine to talk about at that point. So like we had to keep under wraps like who we use to do testing and all that stuff. So I had to stay fairly closed about it. But I'll tell you, if you're getting a lot of stuff sequenced, the cheapest place to do it is China, you know? So
Hmm.
it's they don't consider it a drug when it's just DNA samples, you know? You're not sending cannabis, you're sending DNA samples, right?
Well, we obviously need. Okay, so how much does the deep sequencing cost if you send it to China?
Well, I can't even remember because it's been fucking years since we have. But
But then it's probably cheaper now.
they were probably cheaper now, but they were noticeably cheaper than other options. But it's greatly dependent on volume, you know? So if
Yeah,
you're having one done, it's one price. If you're having 1,000 done, it's a very different price, right?
right.
So if
I'm
you're
so
gonna
I'm still
check
just
a
too
lot of
small time.
stuff,
That's why I think like fine. And I'm gonna talk to Jesse about this. Jesse from the Mothership Labs, who you've spoken to already. Um,
yeah,
about just make a kit to help people preserve the DNA of their genetics from when they're young. Just take this, put it wherever,
that's in a way. Yeah,
just store
it's a
it.
good idea. That's a good
You
idea.
know?
It's a
Yeah.
good idea.
I better do something about it fast because I just put it on the internet.
Well, no, you can do it because it doesn't take very much to do that, you know?
Ugh. So
You put
you
them
did make it.
those
You
little
did.
centrifuge. All you got to do is take those little centrifuge tubes and
Yeah.
basically spritz a little alcohol on a petiole and then stick it in there. You can break it up and stick it in there.
You don't have to dry it.
You got to dry it. Yeah, it has to be dry. Clean and dry. Put it away. I'm
I
sure
love
you'll
it.
find better protocols than that. But in a nutshell, that's what you're doing. It's pretty easy what you need to do for people just to save a petiole as a dry petiole as a representative sample of it.
Catman asks an important question. How do you know they're not switching up the samples, sending multiples? Is that
You don't
I,
know. You don't know.
you
Like,
have you have to use a reputable lab.
you gotta,
It's
yeah,
like it's
ideally
like with
they
anything,
have
you
a
have to
good
trust people.
traceability in the lab, but there's always room for error when you're sending stuff to a lab. But the
Or how about just corruption? Like they're like, how are you gonna know?
mm,
Like, how do you test them? Like, let's say you
well,
send them.
goes to something else even, but that's, with the lab shopping, I'd come up with an antidote years ago that I started shopping around the idea to try and get some big companies to run with it and just give me a royalty because I'm very fond of those type of arrangements. And
Yeah, me too.
but
If
the
anyone wants to do something like that with me, I'm all on
but
board.
the yeah, what were we talking about?
We're talking
Uh,
about. Good. I don't know. We
anyway,
might have got into the too many dab
we-
parts. No, we're talking
um,
about the corruption and the testing and
well, the
too much
lab
errors.
testing.
Yeah.
So I came up with this thing I call third eye blind tested. And this year I actually opened a company and trademarked a certification mark, which is different than a trademark. It's a certification mark, and that's to certify a allocation concealment protocol for the labs to use the codes. And then they don't know whose product they're testing.
Right.
So that this costs the labs to join because they're going to be giving us percentage of their revenue. And we're going to have our team of independent sales will be out there bringing in customers that they're we don't charge them. Like if you want to be fair trade or certified organic as a producer, you got to pay for that. But for ours, it's free for producers to use labs that use our protocol and do certified third eye blind tested product. And then that can appear as a item on their package when possible. They'll be added to our promotional list of companies that you can trust. They would rather not lab shop. They would rather give you the assurance that their products being blind tested and the um man, Space my face. But
Well,
the
yeah. All
oh
right.
yeah.
Now I guarantee you people are enjoying themselves
Anyway,
even
but
more
the
than
other thing
before.
is I wanna do I have to be careful what we say about it because it's not going out yet as this offer, but we're gonna do a percentage of revenues once they start will be dedicated to cash giveaways to bud tenders. And in every state, those cash giveaways have to follow different rules. And some of them, if they're over 400, they have to be reported to the IRS or there's all this compliance we're working through on the side of like sweepstakes and contests and that. So the participating dispensaries have to segment their list to include third eye blind tested product from producers that say we're not giving you fake numbers, we're willing to be blind
Legit.
tested.
Yeah.
So the blockchain part could be done. It's not essential to the process, though. It really isn't. It's really just allocation concealment. Like I was 15 years in the wine business. No testing is valid if it's not blind tested. If you're not testing blind, it's worthless. You know? So if the podcast is reviewing this, if they're not testing the shit blind to me, it's just all, schlock if you're doing that. It's okay if you test the stuff blind and then give your opinion. Now you got something to say.
Hmm.
Otherwise, I don't believe it's shit. And that's how we got to be skeptical about the testing too. And the companies that adhere to the third eye blind tested protocol, the labs, they'll pay a fee to be part of this program, but that'll also be literally what they're paying in sales commissions now. So it's giving them more credibility that the labs, because there's not a great reason for a lab not to do it because the cost isn't astronomical. It's pretty much what they pay in commissions now, most likely. And then there's no reason for the producers not to do it because there's absolutely zero cost to the producers. So we want to kind of have the carrot and stick there where we can say, these people you can trust, but these people you can't trust.
So who's
You know,
paying for it?
these brands, they want to tell you their shit is 42% and blah, blah, blah. They would rather do that. They would rather just play off your stupidity for numbers that are just bullshit rather than just wouldn't you rather look for a mark of credibility with a brand where it's like, hey, this says 24%, but that's a real 24, you know? So, let's be real. Do you want the real test? Look for this. These people have no incentive. And it also saves the labs. A lot of them have problems with collections, whereas we don't permit credit. So every lab test is prepaid for through our clients. So we get rid of their AR issues and we also get between them on a lot of the communication to spare the lab as much as we can. Um, and it really is about keeping them separate. Our agent always has to be in between them anyway. It has to be at least CC'd on all communications so that we know that they're never colluding. And that's the thing. If they're caught talking to them outside of the emails or outside of, calls with the agent, they're moved off the program. They can only do it. So in a way for the labs, they don't always love the cannabis clients because they come with a ton of headaches and they want that yesterday and there's all kinds of fuck ups, from what I've heard. So there, but the labs have to differentiate because there's usually more labs that are needed in any given jurisdiction from what I've seen, with the exception of places like Florida where they only have 10 licenses. So, I mean, you can't really have two labs doing it. There's just no room for more labs. But in the places where labs are competing, we hope to have the honest ones on our program and competent ones too. I mean, that's obviously they've got to be top-notch labs to have reputable numbers, if they've got the credentials. The main thing isn't about verifying that the labs are doing the testing correctly. Their protocols are separate from this in that regard, and They're very important, but they're not what we do. All we do is cut out the collusion. But that's the main problem is the collusion that gets this, happening. So I think that was a market a market oriented solution because there are groups of like industry associations trying to how are we going to stop lab shopping? Oh, we have to standardize our testing protocol. That's not the problem. The problem isn't that they can't standardize their equipment. The problem is that they're literally charging extra to give them back bogus reports. So if we can cut that out and we can give credit to the companies that are planned and then return something to the bud tenders, which are going to be the ones that have to explain this thing to everybody that asks, what does this mean? Or why would I look for blind tested product? It's like, well, those are the companies that are saying, here, test my stuff. But we don't even contact the lab about it ourselves. I mean, we're getting the report and it's all handed in and relabeled by third parties, or relabeled under the supervision or under the protocol of the third party in the lab, not necessarily the supervision. Originally, we were going to do the supervision and put a person in there to recode everything. But then we realized we didn't have to. We just had to vet that one of them can do it. And it's all done on camera too. So we can always have a good look. So the people that are receiving it and repackaging it, they're not the same people that are testing it. That's sort of a fundamental part of that, right? So it's not rolling full steam ahead, but I am in the process of onboarding the first couple of labs. So hopefully, if as soon as I've got hopefully a lab in Kentucky sooner than later, but there's not that many to test yet in Kentucky because the licenses are fairly new there. But they had like when I talked to him 6 months ago, I think there was 36 licenses out there and like 8 lab license. So I mean, only one lab can survive on the 36 clients, and still they got to test other stuff too because they're not going to be able to keep afloat just with 36 clients, right? So but it will be the feather in the cap of the participating labs, I'm sure. And I like that it rewards bud tenders as the promotional effort rather than just buying a big booth at the big shows and stuff like that. Like that would be nice, and maybe once it's all rolling. But to start with, I'd rather just give money to the bud tenders that they've got to work at a shop that's participating to segment the list and then give us a shout out on social media in the month, and they get entered in the monthly draw, which will take down probably 10% of the earnings from that region, for the certification mark.
That's
So we'll see. It's an unusual setup, and it still has to, you know, we still have to make it work as a business. But I feel like it's like that psychological solution to the problem, really. Like market psychology rather than trying to dictate here's how to fix it with a government edict or something, which will just get worked around. It really has to be like a voluntary compliance and then a reward for those who voluntarily comply is they're going to get huge presents and shout outs because we can advertise our producers better than they can advertise themselves because they always have restrictions on advertising, right? So we don't have a license. You don't need a license for what we're doing, we're not handling it. We're just, you know, promotional effort, let's put it like that, or certification mark that isn't a promotional effort. So if that pays off for the producers that use it, people will start getting used to seeing decent numbers. Go ahead, Gabby.
um first of all, I want to thank you for we've spent 3 hours
Oh, have we?
podcasting it. Yes, it's been 3 hours and it has gone by very quickly. I think we've proven that you have a lot to offer, and a lot to
Thank you.
share. And I hope that we can get you to do another couple of hours again soon. I do have a hard cutoff. I was supposed to leave a few minutes ago,
Okay, no problem.
but
I know that's long. I didn't even realize it'd
no,
been
yeah,
that long.
no. Well, that's
Two
what
dab.
happens.
It was a two
That's,
dab show for me. Usually
yeah.
it's a one dab show, but it
But
was a two dab
this
show
is the way
today.
we do it. We do the long form. My long videos get way more views than my short ones. People, and I'm sure the people in the chat will agree. They like these extended conversations, and they like part two. And you know, um, I'd love to have you back on the show. I'm super excited to be one of your selected distributors for your clones.
Thank you, and likewise.
I'm grateful for believing in what we can do.
Well, you
And
came highly recommended, right? We were introduced by one of your satisfied customers who said,
yeah,
"Steve, you got to give your clones to this guy.
my buddy Roy.
He's
Yeah. So
well, you're the man, brother." Well, thank you, Gabby.
no, I
And nice
appreciate
to
you.
meet you, Sasha, too. That's
Yeah. Well,
Thank you, Steve. Thank you
let
very
let
much.
let's get
have a
back
great
and do
day,
it again
guys.
real soon, guys. Okay.
You bet. You
Now
bet.
don't hang up. All right.
I won't. I remember.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.